The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, October 7th, 2021. My name is Emma Figland in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Alex Hochuli, jeez. Author, when Sam's not here, I gotta do it. Author of The End of History, Politics in the 21st Century. Meanwhile, McConnell finally blinked. He agreed to a deal on a short-term lifting of the debt limit with Senate Majority Leader Schumer through December 3rd, delaying an economic catastrophe and a needless fight over an artificial debt ceiling for a few weeks. GOP donors got restless, I'd imagine. A federal judge appointed by Obama has ordered Texas to suspend its near entire abortion ban in a scathing 113-page opinion. Texas, however, vowed to immediately appeal the ruling because, of course. Also in Texas, there was a school shooting outside of Dallas yesterday, and thus far, 4 people have been injured, with 1 in critical condition. The 18-year-old suspect has also been taken into custody. The WHO is celebrating the historic development of the first ever malaria vaccine. Malaria kills 500,000 people every year. Almost half of those are children in the continent of Africa. The vaccine is the first developed for any parasitic disease, which is more complex than, say, viral or bacterial infection. So this is a massive victory. In heartbreaking news, over 120,000 U.S. children have lost a caregiver to the pandemic, meaning the number of orphans to come out of COVID is higher than previously thought, and over half of these children are Hispanic or Black, a disproportionate representation based on population. A new report indicates that the Biden administration knew thousands of Haitian migrants were preparing to seek asylum in the U.S. They knew in July, so they can no longer hide behind the "we were unprepared" defense. And lastly, Minneapolis police body cam footage shows cops joking about hunting protesters in the wake of George Floyd's murder, fist bumping as they shot rubber bullets at them, and encouraging the gassing of demonstrators as well. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, everyone. We have a great show for you. Sam is out, as he is every Thursday these days, and actually I will be out tomorrow. I am off, doing a little bit of celebrating, so I won't be in, and soak me up while you can today on this lovely Thursday. We have averted an economic catastrophe, as I mentioned, with McConnell for the first time that I can remember, buckling a little bit, showing a minute sign of weakness. He wasn't willing to tank the entire global economy just in order to obstruct Biden's agenda immediately. He's just putting that off until December. We won't know how that's going to play out for a few weeks at this point, but it does buy Chuck Schumer and the Democrats some time, as they're also juggling this reconciliation process. Now, speaking of the reconciliation process and the Build Back Better agenda, Joe Manchin, he is one of the 2 U.S. senators holding up the entire Biden agenda, which has already been whittled down. We should point out the Build Back Better infrastructure plan was initially around 6 to 7 trillion as over 10 years, as imagined by Senate Budget Chair Bernie Sanders, who we'll be speaking about in a bit. But Joe Manchin now, even though the initial figure was decided as $3.5 trillion, which we're not going to get anyway, that was the compromise coming out of the Senate budget process. Manchin still wants it whittled down to around $1.5 trillion over 10 years, which is very, very small comparatively to what was initially imagined. And he spoke to the media yesterday because the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But frankly, it is a lesser evil in comparison to Sinema, who hides from her constituents and from the media. Regardless, Manchin spoke about why he wants to cut down Biden's Build Back Better agenda to a fraction of what it was initially supposed to be. Here he is speaking to the press.
So I've been very clear when it comes to who we are as a society, who we are as a nation, and why we are still the hope of the world. I don't believe that we should turn our society into an entitlement society. I think that we should still be a compassionate, rewarding society. I think that fares best for all of us. But compassion means taking care of those who can't take care of themselves, whether they're young, whether they've had some type of a challenge in life, whether it be mental or physical. Those are responsibilities that we have, and we can all meet those responsibilities. And I feel very strongly about that. And we will continue. This is going to take time to get this done. Getting it done quickly is not going to benefit anybody. So let's make sure that we do it and do it right. So
there's a lot there. But let me just mention entitlement in reference to Joe Manchin. You know, I'd say there's a little bit of entitlement in, I guess, collecting checks from a coal company, or at least making a bunch of money from a coal company in your state as you make a six-figure salary as one of the 100 most powerful people in the country as a part of the United States Senate, and as you preside over the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. But who's to say? When you're rich, entitlement is foundational. When you're poor, entitlement is a moral failing. And
corporations are entitled to an impoverished and undereducated workforce, basically, that's the big entitlement in America. Is Joe Manchin's coal companies have workforces that need to go work for those coal companies because they need health care and they need and they're not given they're given wages that aren't able for them to move and advance beyond that. They're like, this is captivity.
And that's why he also mentions the phrase, or uses the word rewarding. A rewarding society. That's the operative word here. Take out compassion, because it can literally mean anything. We know this from decades of usage of the concept of compassionate conservatism. When we know that conservative ideology is incompatible with compassion, he mentions rewarding because of that same disciplinary attitude, right? We are going to reward you for being a obedient worker and participating in the workforce on the conditions that we set for you.
Yeah, feudal plantation, whatever like sort of mindset you want to put this in.
Exactly. So that's why it's important for the left to reset the conversation, not around buzzwords like compassion, but around policy sets, and say what you're going to do for people. And that's exactly what Senate Budget Chair Bernie Sanders did yesterday in response to that comment by Joe Manchin.
Now, Senator Manchin, as I understand it, talked about today about not wanting to see our country become an entitlement society. Well, I am not exactly sure what he means by that. Does that mean that we end the $300 direct payments for working class parents, which have cut childhood poverty in this country as a result of the American Rescue Plan, in half? Is protecting working families and cutting childhood poverty an entitlement? Does Senator Manchin think we should once again have one of the highest levels of childhood poverty of any major country on earth?
That's the point, right? That's the point. Manchin defines entitlements, or these things, as entitlements, which are in Build Back Better. Universal pre-K, those toddlers, those kids are so entitled. Medicare expansion, dental, hearing, and vision, and that an extension of the child tax credit, which Bernie talked about how it did alleviate poverty, paid family and medical leave. These are things that he claims are entitlements, and that's what the focus needs to be.
But Joe Manchin's daughter is entitled to jack up the prices of EpiPens and make people buy 2 of them because she's the CEO of a company that she rose to that position lying about her business degree, and which she was also entitled to West Virginia University covering up that she lied about that while her dad was a governor. So that's entitlements. Interesting who gets entitled to what in this country.
Right. And what is defined as an entitlements versus just basic humanity. I also want to note that Bernie's being based all over the place over the past 48 hours. He also declined to sign on to Cory Booker's letter to condemn the protesters in Arizona who spoke to Sinema in the bathroom because the bathroom is a sacred place.
As Ben Shapiro will tell us later.
Yes. Ben Shapiro gets very uncomfortable when you mention the bathroom. Bernie really, I think, is the only notable progressive senator to not sign on to this, and his office declined to comment to Axios, which I love. Elizabeth Warren signed on. Cory Booker obviously spearheaded this effort. Bernie Sanders understands that this is righteous anger that protesters are directing at Sinema and Manchin as well. And this is going to be the consequence if you stand in the way of legislation that helps people. You're not going to be comfortable in the streets and in the bathroom and on your yacht. That's not going to be the case. And so keep the pressure up, because we've got, at the very least, one person in the Senate who understands. And luckily for us, he's got a pretty powerful position as budget chair. And so hopefully he'll continue to hold the line. We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we will be joined by Alex Hochuli. Man, I wrote down like Kathy Hochul, and that's not true. So that's what's throwing me off. Author of the end of history, politics in the 21st century. I'm so sorry, Alex. Sam, take it away.
Thank you, Emma. Hey, today's sponsor is BetterHelp Online Counseling. They're giving our audience 10% off their first month when you go to BetterHelp.com/Majority Report. BetterHelp gives you access to your own fully licensed and accredited therapist via phone, chat, or video. Now, sure you're aware if you've attempted to go see a therapist, therapists elsewhere have long wait lists. Sometimes it can take you weeks. Sometimes it can take you months before they can see you. But when you sign up with BetterHelp, they match you with a therapist based on your specific needs, and you'll be communicating with them in less than 24 hours. A lot of people found telemedicine to be very helpful, particularly therapy during COVID. And I suspect there's a lot of folks who are just going to stick with that. I found it much more convenient. Obviously, a lot of stress coming out of a pandemic, a lot of stress during a pandemic, a lot of stress when there's not a pandemic. Therapy has been extremely helpful for me. It's always helpful to speak to someone. And once BetterHelp connects you with a therapist, if you find that it's not a good fit, you can switch to a new one at any time for any reason with no additional charge. They have thousands of licensed therapists from all over the country, so they have therapists with specialties that may not even be available in your area. BetterHelp also tends to be more affordable than therapists that you'd find through traditional means. You don't have to have insurance to use BetterHelp, and they have financial aid options for those who qualify. BetterHelp is giving everyone in our audience 10% off your first month when you go to BetterHelp.com/Majority Report. That's BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp.com/Majority Report. You can find the URL in the description of this video or podcast, and check it out.
We are back, and we are joined now by Alex Hochuli, author of The End of History, Politics in the 21st Century. Alex, thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm really excited to talk with you about this, because I love some of these existential questions about the tides of politics, which your book certainly grapples with, this like very uneasy and turbulent time that we're all experiencing where the neoliberal ruling class has been dealt a lot of blows. And then we're also seeing the rise of authoritarian right-wing populism. And like in the book, you'll also talk about the show Jackass, but then also in the same breath, we're talking about Brazilian politics and the collapse of the Soviet Union, I guess. So maybe we can just start from the widest focus and then move inward.
Right. Well, I mean, I think you summed it up well, that we live in confusing times, and it's quite obvious that sometime around maybe 5 years ago, something changed, or at least people started becoming conscious of the fact that something had changed, that the way that we thought politics worked no longer seemed to work anymore. And as a consequence, you had people reaching for all these sorts of crazy analogies of where we are today, right? So people, I think in the US, were talking about whether this is a repeat of Weimar Germany, the Nazis are coming, or maybe if they're a bit more sophisticated, start talking about Mussolini, and maybe Trump was actually Mussolini. Or, I even saw mentions of that the US is about to live through its years of lead, which is a reference to the 1970s in Italy, or, a new civil war, things like this. And I think that all testifies to the fact that because these interpretive frames obviously don't apply to today, that there's a great deal of confusion. And if you look at maybe smarter books talking about this stuff, they talk about the rise of populism, the end of democracy, the end of liberalism, the end of globalization, maybe even the end of Western civilization. And for all that those elements might have a certain element of truth to them, I think they all miss what is fundamentally going on and what is kind of, historically unique about our present moment. And that's the fact that the period that's just been passed, let's say from 1990 until 2016, democracy wasn't vibrant. So to talk about the end of democracy seems a bit bizarre, as if you're saying that what was the operating mode of politics for the past 30 years was, that everything was hunky-dory and everything worked well. The reality is, and this is why we say it's the end of history, is that the period that has been termed the end of history, the period after the end of the Cold War, the period when liberal democracy was hegemonic, the period in which all big questions about politics were held to be settled. All that remained was to fine-tune the technical implementation. Should we raise interest rates 0.5% or bring them down a bit? All that sort of form of a very limited, circumscribed, centrist form of politics, that had suddenly started to fall apart. And it started to fall apart because the legitimacy of ruling classes across on both sides of the Atlantic started to crumble. And it started to crumble because of the delayed consequences of the 2008 global financial crisis.
Yeah, and even before that, right? I mean, I think we can focus on the 2008 global financial crisis in a bit, but I guess I kind of want to start at 1990 and even maybe the presidency of George H.W. Bush, which was, in my mind, and I think you guys in your book, your co-authors and you as well, say this very well, it was this new world order about hegemony, as you mentioned, and submission, which defined Bush's foreign policy. And also there was zero questioning of the neoliberal world order in the wake of the Cold War. The Soviets were defeated, and thus it means that the neoliberal capitalism as envisioned currently is by definition the victor, and thus it was basically unquestioned until, as you mentioned, 2008.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's important to remember that capitalism won, that we used to live in a world. I mean, I was young, I don't remember it personally, but we used to live in a world where there was a sense of an alternative, that an alternative could exist. The existence of the USSR, for example, bore witness, was a testament to the fact that there could be some alternative way of running human affairs, of running human society. Even if it was degenerated and authoritarian, the simple fact that it existed had an important weight in people's minds, the way that they looked at the world. As of then, there was this brief moment maybe in the early 90s when people were hopeful that the end of the Soviet Union could actually birth a new era of freedom, which then people became disappointed with pretty quickly. But I guess in the period of George H.W. Bush, capitalism was triumphant and they were pretty excited about it. And they were self-confident, going, we're going to implement shock therapy in Russia and we're going to, make the world kind of safe for capitalism around the world. Over the next, sort of decades, they start losing a bit of confidence. And that confidence then is shattered by the time 2016 comes around. And we say that the end of history begins, if that's not too complicated a way to put it. But the end of history begins really with Trump and with Brexit, because those are, the core nerve centers of global capitalism, and they're shaken by something that wasn't meant to happen. It was two moments, both in Trump and Brexit, in their very different ways, saying that what we expected about globalization was now subject to political decision. It's worth remembering Tony Blair, who's like this great figure of left neoliberal politics, said that globalization is a force of nature, not a policy choice. It is a fact, right? And that basically sums up the whole mode of end of history politics. There are no choices. These things like globalization, like free trade, they're just impositions. They're facts of nature, they're forces of nature, and we don't really have anything to say about them. All you can do is maybe decide to increase a little bit of welfare spending to protect some people, but basically the rules of the game are settled. And suddenly, as of 2016, that's all blown open. The rules of the game are now put into question. And that's the end of history, and that's why there's so much confusion around. It's also why, and maybe you wanted to come on to this, why elites have reacted so hysterically and have been unable to comprehend, to grasp what is going on, and as a consequence have recourse to, in the better framings, the rise of populism. But in their most kind of deranged form, and you can think maybe of someone like Rachel Maddow, pursuing the kind of Russiagate conspiracy theories. I mean, it's basically elite conspiracy theories to try to explain, or really avoid coming up with a sensible explanation for why society and politics is changing. It's going, hey, we lost an election. It must be Russian interference. The most powerful empire in human history is, being put off its rocker by some Russian bots. It's completely crazy. And yet these were supposedly very sensible, moderate, rational, centrist figures who were reaching for the most crazy conspiracy theories. And this was on both sides of the Atlantic. It's worth remembering. The same thing happened with Brexit in the UK, saying that because Britain was leaving the EU, the world would fall apart. It would lead to Nazism or fascism. British people would be starving on the streets. All these sort of catastrophic scenarios, which just were ways of the elite avoiding dealing with what had happened. The fact that neoliberalism had left people seriously discontent, poorer, and with less control over their lives, less control over their government. And what we've termed this, it's something called neoliberal order breakdown syndrome, which is a way of joining together all these different hysterical responses from elites who were unable to accept, to explain, and to respond to this new political change, which they expected would never happen again, that everything would just remain the same forever.
Right. And there's so much there. One thing I wanted to touch on before we move past it was the naturalization of the neoliberal world order in like the post-1990 world, and how essentially this is how things are going to stay. This is like the natural way of being. And one manifestation of that, which I'd never considered, which you point out in your book, is how activism changed in many in the wake of this before 2008. How post-Cold War activism was individualistic, consumer oriented, and usually based on like changing one's consumption choices, which I think is indicative exactly of that very dynamic. We're not focusing much on the state, because the state is natural and this is how this is supposed to be. We were triumphant in the Cold War, and this is like going to be the dominant hegemonic way of being. The only way that we can express our discontent is in these very narrow lanes that doesn't necessarily, do anything structural.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we tried, especially in the introduction, to sort of characterize what the end of history felt like, especially for younger readers who maybe don't have a recollection of what the 90s and 2000s were. I kind of came of age in the 2000s and remembered complaining with friends that, man, there's no politics. There's no real serious political contestation over what society should look like. At best, there were just kind of cultural, or maybe I should say subcultural, attempt to kind of create out a little space, a little kind of alternative culture. And this was really just the sort of tail end of the 60s counterculture, kind of in its most degenerated form. Very individualistic, based around shopping, even if it was being against shopping, in the kind of, if you think of some elements of the anti-globalization movement, being against advertising, for example, like Adbusters magazine and stuff like that. All it really said was, we accept that society is the way it is, and we just want to kind of recoil and create our own little private space around it. even in its better moments, politics around then was, and left-wing oppositional politics, didn't really hold any serious belief that the world could be changed. So if we think of first the anti-globalization movement and then opposition to the war on terror, the war in Iraq, it was often, I think, betrayed a kind of disbelief that anything could really change. You know, I don't remember what it was in the US, but in the UK, the slogan was "not in our name," which kind of seems to suggest you're going to do the war anyway, but just we're bowing out. We're not giving you license to do it, which again doesn't really suggest any seriousness about taking state power or even necessarily winning elections. And so that was the dominant mode of left-wing politics until even after the global financial crisis. Because what happens then is that suddenly you have a return of politics. Very little baby steps, not a big deal, but Occupy already signaled that something was changing. Because before, throughout the 2000s, a lot of left-wing politics was minoritarian. It sought to speak in favor of, defending minorities, disadvantaged, small groups of people, those the excluded, rather than speaking the name of the majority. Occupy, for all its faults, at least said, hey, we're here in favor of the 99% against the 1%. And that already signaled what we see kind of as the essence of politics, which is division, right? Against the old consensus politics that dominated the 90s and 2000s, suddenly there was division, dissensus, the idea that, we have conflicting interests, which seems kind of basic, but was an important sort of development then. The problem is that things like Occupy and a whole range of kind of what they called Facebook protests at the time, and you can think of, the Arab Spring in the Middle East, occupations of squares in Italy, or rather Spain and Greece, all of these were what's been called horizontalist, right? This idea that of leaderless politics, of spontaneous uprisings, where everybody just comes in the streets and gets together and somehow progress will ensue from this, right? Just by denouncing the establishment, denouncing the elite. And that's a real problem. And that's something that we're still stuck with. So suddenly there are people on the streets, suddenly there's big protests, suddenly there's a complete delegitimization of the establishment and what they believe to be true, whether it's neoliberalism, whether it's technocratic modes of managing politics. No one believes in that anymore. But at the same time, we don't have the tools, the intellectual resources to think through how to do politics again. We've forgotten kind of what politics was. And that's what we're sort of getting at in the book, that we live in this moment of great confusion, that politics has seemed to return, but we lack the kind of resources to really try to understand what is unique about our moment, and that we can't just rely on the old forms that we inherited from the past.
Right. And another great point in that vein that is a part of a dynamic that we're all too familiar with here at the Majority Report is the concept of anti-politics. They're all corrupt, right? Yeah. Everybody is too corrupt, and engaging is not worth your time. And here's this alternative method. Again, like we fight this with people in leftist YouTube spaces who I think are actively getting people to think stupidly about politics and encouraging them to disengage from the process outside of just vitriolic nihilism and anger expressed on Twitter. And it seems like a myopic conversation, but I think it is a part of this exact malaise that is this like mass nihilism and inability to comprehend how things can be changed, because it seems so insurmountable, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, so this idea of anti-politics, which is, I mean, just to define it, it's initially a mood of rejection of the political establishment, but it goes further than that because it really signals a rejection of leadership, of representation itself, and therefore it kind of is self-defeating. So this rejection, as I said, these mass movements and so on, big protests, signal the return of politics, but the way that they try to make their politics happen why is this? And if you allow me just to kind of go way back in history, popular disgruntlement and anger with the way that the world is run was usually channeled, I mean, since, let's say, 1848, really, to the left, to socialism, but there was this idea to rally behind, right? But revolutionary socialism in many cases. We now live in a world after the fall of the Berlin Wall of the historic defeat of the working class and the end of socialism. you have a period where, let's just say, nothing really happens, or at least nothing kind of left-wing really happens for 30 years. Suddenly you have this return of politics, but politics returns in the absence of a real cohering idea to get behind, whether that's you know, a kind of more reformist socialism or revolutionary socialism. And so as a consequence, people's anger gets kind of splattered out in all sorts of different directions and really ends up being nothing more than a rejection of the establishment with nothing to put it in its place. So you can be like, let's reject the establishment, they're all corrupt. But usually that meant assuming a sort of revolutionary socialist position, right? That you're going to take power in the name of an idea with your party, with a mass movement, whatever it might be. Now it's like the same thing, except without all that stuff about parties and movements and socialism, right? So as a consequence, there's nothing to put in its place. And this sort of anti-politics is something that we kind of cover this in the book. You know, it's everywhere from South Africa to Nigeria to Slovakia to Thailand to Brazil, which we spent a bit of time talking about, especially in places like Italy, but also in the UK and US. They all take different forms, but what kind of unites them is this idea, this denunciation of the ruling class as corrupt, but without any notion of what to replace it. Just one final thing on this is that idea of them all being corrupt, that all leaders are corrupt, that any form of representation of interest is corrupt, undermines the left itself, because it means that your own leaders of your own organizations are going to be corrupt. People just say, no, I don't want to be part of that because nothing can truly represent how I feel about politics, or what I believe about the world, or what I think should happen. And that's why it's such a dangerous double-edged sword, because it seems like a sharp sword on one side that's going to cut the heads off of the ruling class, of the elite. On the other hand, it also kind of ends up cutting off the heads of the left itself.
Yeah, and there's this dynamic that you flesh out in the book about, like, the authoritarian right, that made me think of this a little bit. How there is this impulse that I think is very dangerous by some in elite circles as well, or people who are analyzing politics, to then show deference to, say, non-elected representatives, and that can, like the military leadership, for example, and heralding them as somehow purer than the corrupt representatives of who are elected. And there's a mass amount of corruption, say, in the United States and in other governments as well, of course. But that trends towards right-wing authoritarianism. It provides a simple solution, which I think feeds into some of these narratives that you talk about in your book, how, like, there's these now this concept of scarcity and of scarce resources being taken from outside scary people. It's like a way for right-wingers to funnel the generalized anxiety about climate change into nationalist white supremacist narratives. Nobody does this better than Tucker Carlson, obviously, but he's kind of ahead of the curve on this, because this seems to be where things are going. You know, a rejection of politics, it's not something the left should engage in because of these very scary consequences that I just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we're not making the argument necessarily that left-wing people should believe in whatever kind of milquetoast, center-left, social democrat that's there. I mean, that's not the argument we're making. We're making an argument for taking politics seriously, and whatever the form of politics may be, it's that fundamentally relies on trusting the masses and on democratic legitimacy. And so the examples that you've just given there of kind of relying on judges to, you know, basically curtail politicians' autonomy because they might be corrupt, or the military or whatever, is something that's really recurrent in all of these cases, because that sort of delegitimization that the whole elite, the whole establishment has suffered, ends up with people looking for some saviors in various different places. And ultimately, maybe this is going to be a bit corny, but the savior is us, right? I mean, it's the masses, and we have to trust ourselves collectively. Maybe could I just talk about Brazil quickly, if I won't lose your listeners?
Oh, 100%. This is Michael,
love it.
Yeah, Michael would love this. Yes, continue.
Yeah. I remember speaking with him about Brazil quite a lot. So we use the example of Brazil because it kind of crystallizes so many of these tendencies. And so maybe you're not familiar with the specific history of the past 8 years in Brazil. But what happened in 2013 was that you had this mass uprising, which was on the one level a rejection of the political class, but really was demanding better healthcare, better better education, also sort of an end to corruption and so on. But it was kind of, let's say, democratic, social democratic in its nucleus, right? But very soon after, you found on protests that they were banning any insignia of political parties, right? There's like no parties. We are just Brazilians here. There's no divisions amongst us. Any party, no red flags, no red banners, right? No color red, no socialism. We're all Brazilian here, wearing the green and gold of the national colors. And that ends up leading at the end, I mean, to kind of spoiler alert here, to Bolsonaro being elected in 2018. But what happens in that interim period is that the kind of political demands, rejecting the political establishment, but demanding an improvement in social services, for example, actually led to a very narrow anti-corruption demand, or very narrow focus on the whole political establishment being corrupt. Now, where does that lead? What are the options that are presented there if the whole political establishment is corrupt, but you're not arguing for revolutionary transformation of society? Where that ends up is in two places. One, sort of technocratic, anti-democratic, technocratic sort of ideas where, for example, you put judges in charge, and so judges are able to stop politicians acting on the popular will because whatever, corruption, right? And that's something that happened in Brazil because you had basically the judges taking Lula out of the political game. So instead of it being up to the people whether to elect Lula, who had these corruption charges against him, it was up to the judges to decide who should and shouldn't be in the political game. So that's the sort of technocratic, or what we call post-political kind of consequence of this anti-corruption politics. The other one is an authoritarian one, where basically all of democracy is seen as suspect, and that democratic institutions, the whole process of representation, will only breed corruption because maybe the people aren't to be trusted, right? You know, there's corrupt politicians. Who elects them? Well, it's the people. Therefore, it's the people's fault. And therefore, you need a kind of an authoritarian strongman to come in and clean things up, supposedly because now this guy who's not accountable at all will somehow be able to clean things up. Of course, you know, we can obviously laugh at that idea and say it's nonsense, but that is genuinely the sort of logical consequence of this sort of anti-corruption politics, or as we call it, anti-politics.
Right. And Brazil is obviously important because you can see what can be as well, right? There's a vision for how leftist leaders can win and can be incredibly effective. So you can see both extremes, honestly, of the dynamics that you lay out in the book here. Yeah.
Though I think there's maybe some miscomprehension, I guess, outside of Brazil and indeed within Brazil of what the sort of left under the Workers' Party represented, because the left under the Workers' Party ruled during the period of high neoliberalism, right, throughout the 2000s. And so although it seemed like an alternative and certainly was preferable to whatever the Brazilian right had to offer, it still worked within a very circumscribed, limited frame of what was politically possible. And that basically is what we call post-politics, right? This way of effectively depoliticizing politics, of removing important decisions from contestation. So what happened throughout the Workers' Party period in power is that its own base was demobilized. It became lots of kind of activists and union leaders were integrated into the state, managing pension plans and so on. And as a consequence, the popular energy that the PT used to be able to channel became sort of neutered and watered down. And so that was itself, you know, the form of kind of neoliberal managerial politics that existed in Brazil in 2000s just happened to be a left-wing form of that. So we're not necessarily arguing in favor of that, even if it's a preferable option by far compared to what we've got now in Brazil. I think we should be wary of the kind of left-wing version of this sort of consensus politics, the sort of politics that ruled throughout the end of history. We should kind of grasp the nettle and demand more.
Are you hopeful about an era of remobilization?
I mean, if we're talking kind of globally or let's say across the West, I think that's possible. I think the sort of delegitimation of political establishments that we're seeing over the past 5 years is very important. Now, I guess two worries about this, or two very serious roadblocks. One is that COVID has led to a sort of reestablishment of technocratic authority, right? Let's give it to Dr. Fauci to decide what to do, right, in the American case. And you find various other examples of this across the West. So that's a worry, and it's led to a kind of neoliberal resumption. And you can see something like Biden, for example, where Biden, in my view, is basically doing Trumpism, but doing it, in a kind of nicer, more technocratic, shiny way, but basically implementing Trumpism. And that's a way. That's a way of what we've called also, or techno-populism, which is kind of a mixture of the kind of end of history technocracy and with a little bit of doses of populism to kind of throw to the masses, right? So that's one worry. That's one worry that COVID has led to a sort of dampening down of these whole range of mass protests. If you cast your mind back to 2019, the before times, there were protests everywhere, all around the world, in Europe, in South America, in the Middle East. And so we have to see where that evolves. The other thing, and the other concern, is this revenge of the culture wars. So what we're seeing now, especially in the US, but increasingly kind of US influenced culture wars across Western Europe as well, that are different from the old form of culture wars. The 80s and 90s culture war in the US were around hot button moral issues around abortion and the death penalty and things like that. Now they seem more political because they're about questions like immigration or indeed COVID, right? But the form that they take is a kind of culture war form. It's based on a cultural polarization, based on fighting over symbols that often don't have any kind of real political reference. So it's about whether you use a mask or not, which isn't really saying about how the pandemic response should be managed, whether the state should have a right to lock down society or not, whether it's a state responsibility to provide healthcare or not. All these big political questions get kind of smoothed over by this really kind of facile and kind of phony polarization around, whether you wear a mask or not. And so that's another danger, that these new culture wars ends up sucking all the political energy out of the room and being diverted towards this polarization, this cultural polarization, which actually suits the elites pretty well, because people can carry on squabbling and arguing on social media and nothing really changes.
Well, then, it's also, I think, important to bring up some of the critical race theory stuff that we're seeing on the right here in the United States, because that's I think a part of a tried and true tactic by the right. The critical race theory is very similar to a lot of the things that we've seen in the right wing in general, but that's like I think the fact that it's tied into the pandemic speaks to just like a larger anxiety that I haven't been able to fully put my finger on yet, because I want to ask you a little bit about this too, about how things are going to shift post pandemic. It seems like this is a bit of not a reversal, but a way for the right to kind of like culturally encase themselves and have a sense of agency that's a bit different than what we've seen before.
Yeah, one thing I would say is that, and I think the left tries to avoid this conclusion, but the left won, at least the cultural left won. Now, that's not something that I would necessarily associate with in terms of I guess what you could call sort of cultural liberalism, which I don't think is the same as, Marxism or socialism, for instance. And so that is fully represented across most leading mainstream institutions. And so the right have lost and are therefore, I think you're right, kind of encasing themselves and trying to create their own kind of bubbles of safety, which aren't subject to the forms of, I guess what you could call rationalization, but the sort of hegemony of cultural liberalism. And so I think if we ignore that aspect and they ignore that aspect that the cultural left actually won, it was successful, we kind of misunderstand what's going on. And we often tend to say, well, this is the return of some old right-wing nasty ideas which are going to come and win, and it's the kind of fascist revival or whatever, right? I think it's important to understand that the right is actually very weak. It's very weak today. It doesn't have a lot of popular purchase. What it is able to do, it certainly as we're talking about the sort of populist right, not the mainstream institutional right, is that it's able to funnel a lot of disgruntlement and a lot of kind of rebellious energy. Because if you're thinking like, you might not have any, let's say, connection to the left, but you hate what's been going on. You hate the fact that, for example, the lockdowns have prevented you from working or even just seeing your friends and things like this. And you think that might be wrong. Where are you going to go? The left is basically saying, hey, do as you're told, follow the rules, without asking any serious questions about the way the pandemic has been managed, for instance, then the right's going to be the place you go. That the rebellious energy is all on the right. And I think that's a very dangerous place for the left to then find itself in the position of being or of always trying to be sort of the adults in the room. And it's weird because it's, we were talking a little bit about the kind of culture, the sort of alt culture of the 90s and stuff. You talked about Jackass and whatever. Yeah. That sort of like Gen X style of politics was all about saying, like putting like middle finger up at authority and whatever, which I'm not defending at all, right? I think that's a really limited form of politics. I think what I've said should make that obvious. But we've kind of gone full circle here, or gone 180, where the left is now going, respect the authority of the technocratic administrators and follow the rules and so on. That's not a good look for the left, I think.
Yeah, no, but at the same time, I mean, I understand the compulsion in the middle of a pandemic to trust the person that knows what they're talking about.
No,
right?
Absolutely. Though, I think we have to ask serious questions about scientists, because I think, yes, we should respect scientific authority. And I think it's very important to defend science as a process of open-ended discovery. But to just defend the authority of specific technocrats effectively is problematic, because they have their own politics that they bring. It's not just purely technical expertise that is at play there. Ultimately, these things are always political decisions. So you might say that, for example, lockdowns might help prevent the spread, but then you have to balance that against other issues. For example, the fact that people haven't been able to get healthcare for other serious conditions. I'm not trying to get into discussion specifically about the pandemic. All I'm trying to illustrate is the importance of politics and not trying to, and the left should, most of all, not trying to suck politics out of what should be political decisions and say, this is just a technical issue. We should do as the experts say. We should, these things should always be put into question.
Right. Outsourcing inherently political decisions to non-elected officials is not a good, I think, like mode for the left to fall into.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's an understandable impulse, and even a helpful one, at least to defer to, say, the CDC in the middle of a pandemic, but deferring to specific officials that are unelected is like probably not the best.
Well, and don't put the CDC in charge of evictions if you can stop evictions with you.
Right, exactly. So I guess I'll end with you here. Do you see a second end or a third end or a new shift or a rebirth or whatever after the pandemic? Because like a lot of this is depressing, but there are glimmers of hope, as you mentioned, post 2008. It's just how is that captured?
Yeah, I mean, I would say don't panic. Things are a lot worse than you think they are. I mean, we are in a historical nadir in terms of what is possible. At the same time, the fact that things are falling apart does open up a glimmer of possibility. And if I would say one thing, it's that we should be wary of the fact that there's a whole lot of forces which are trying to put politics back in the box, to depoliticize things, or to allow them to be politicized only in kind of culture wars sort of framing. And so we should be open to new forms of rebellion and things that might not look like what we want them to look like, right? If we're kind of like left-wing people or activists or intellectuals looking at things and going, well, this doesn't sound like the stuff that I expected it to be. Well, we're in very different terrain. The 20th century is now long over. And so to expect things to look like that would be a real sort of category error. So we should be open to things. And if things look like populist, too right-wing maybe, we should think twice about what is actually behind that, because things will take various different forms today and they're not set in stone, and we should be kind of open to the possibilities that that kind of new forms of rebellion or dissent are things that can actually be good for the left and that can lead us to break with this kind of historical deadlock that we're currently in.
Alex Hochuli, author of The End of History, Politics in the 21st Century. Alex, thanks so much for your time today. Great discussion. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers.
All right, folks, taking a quick break, and we will be right back and wrap up some things. We are back. And in case you've been living under a rock, well, maybe not even. In case you aren't tapped into what a lot of the like centrist types in the media and in DC are saying about the protesters who had the gall to ask their senator to represent them. There's a lot of pearl clutching about this, and even Cory Booker signed a letter condemning the actions of harassing the esteemed Senator Sinema. And yet we're not seeing the same outrage about just regular people getting harassed, because the powers that be are fine with divorcing the content of what is being protested from the form. And that serves power, by the way, even though
because this popular mobilization is, as we just discussed with Hochuli, important for the right wing and an opportunity for them. And that's how they see it. So we're going to analyze one. Yeah.
Here is one of those instances of anti-mask demonstrators in Beverly Hills, California.
Beverly Hills, interesting. This is just to note where this message is being received at. This is Beverly Hills. This is actually the same protester who was yelled at by the homeless guy in the clip we played yesterday, where she asked, "Why don't you see all the homeless dead in the streets?" And he says, "Because I'm vaccinated." I won't say.
Yeah, she called her dumb bleep. But basically, the same woman who's clearly been busy decided it's time to berate parents and their children and accuse them of abuse. Where did she get that from? Let's take a listen.
He's gonna be traumatized because you put that mask on him and you don't let him breathe freely. You're traumatized. That's my choice. Yeah, well, that's my choice. Yeah, you better respect my choice. You propagandize. You're not being told the truth. You're scaring your kid by yelling. You're scaring your kid by yelling. Huh?
You're propagandized. That's interesting.
That is insanely infuriating. And I know I'm not a parent, because my first reaction to that is, how are all those anti-vax people walking away with all their teeth? But I realize you can't just sock people when you're walking your child home from school. But I mean, getting in their face, that is child abuse right there. Like, that is a very traumatizing experience for those kids to have some complete
some random woman accuse your parent of abusing you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, right. I mean, and the idea that they care about child abuse is instead of enforcing this sort of culture war totem that masks are subservience, which exactly. I wonder where we got that idea from. I wonder where that idea entered the zeitgeist.
Roll the clip.
So the next time you see someone in a mask on the sidewalk or on the bike path, do not hesitate. Ask politely but firmly, "Would you please take off your mask? Science shows there is no reason for you to be wearing it. Your mask is making me uncomfortable." We should do that, and we should keep doing it until wearing a mask outside is roughly as socially accepted as lighting a Marlboro in an elevator. It's repulsive. Don't do it around other people. That's the message we should send, because it's true. As for forcing children to wear masks outside, that should be illegal. Your response when you see children wearing masks as they play should be no different from your response to seeing someone beat a kid in Walmart. Call the police immediately. Contact Child Protective Services. Keep calling until someone arrives. What you're looking at is abuse. It's child abuse, and you are morally obligated to attempt to prevent it.
Leads directly into the Beverly Hills homes of these reactionaries, and they go out and take it as marching orders to abuse other people's kids.
And you know what, too? Understand that this is a part of Tucker Carlson's project. He sees this constituency as someone new to tap into, as a new area in which he can radicalize people to the right wing.
Yes, because it's not, you can't do that. You can't attract people by saying tax cuts and don't do any spending and all this pro-boss, pro-corporate stuff. So you have to, a basketball player wants special treatment from a municipal vax mandate. Okay, that's something I can talk about, because all of this propaganda is designed to conceal that they are for the bosses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, I think it also is just like there has always been this anti-vax contingent that percolates throughout the country. And it's, of course, grown exponentially during the pandemic. And Tucker Carlson saw this group of people who are inherently mistrustful of authority, of science, who have these proclivities, and said, okay, maybe they aren't necessarily right-wing now, but I have the ability to turn them over and convert them in many ways. And they may not even define themselves as right-wingers at this point. But once you're participating in these spaces and once you get in these spaces, it's inevitable. And Tucker Carlson understands that. He's been at the forefront of a variety of these very scary conversion projects and influence projects. This is why he sees something in somebody like Jimmy Dore, and he sees something in somebody like Andrew Yang, who we'll talk about in the second hour of the program. These are useful little factions that he thinks are going to be helpful in order to complete this, white supremacist takeover that he's envisioning. He may not say it like that, but that's what it is.
Yeah, well, I mean, he does say he has a cultural problem with immigrants.
Immigration, so, yeah, he all but says it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the project, and it is notable that all these people are crying crocodile tears for Kyrsten Sinema, and we had to take it like it was such a big worrying thing when the guy got in Tucker's face at a Montana bait shop. But meanwhile, this is a direct consequence of Tucker Carlson's actions, and we won't hear anything from it. From the people who, even if they didn't think what Sinema, like the Tucker guests, who might not think that what happened to Sinema was bad because they can't take that sort of elite protecting take, but they think that it's hypocritical. So the thing to point out is the hypocrisy. I think it's weird if all you ever point out is hypocrisy. Yeah. For instance, like at the border, look at this hypocrisy. Don't you want to go a little bit further and say something about Title 42, or is it just about the liberal hypocrisy for you?
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, hard to cash in on liberal cultural agreement when you're trying to talking about politics. That's going to get in the way of that. Making a substantive point about policy. Anyway. All right, folks. Peacock folks, that's all the time that we have. Enjoy your Peacocktober. Jesus. See you tomorrow. I've been seeing those Peacocktober ads. And so
Wait, those are real ads?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. I thought you made that up. But...
Nope. I'm not that brilliant. All right, folks, we are going to head into the fun half where we will talk about a variety of things, including Andrew Yang's appearance on Tucker Carlson's program. But first, do we have Brandon and Matt?
We have one of them at this point. Maybe Matt will join us in a little bit. Let me widen the screen. Brandon will be joining us in a little bit. In the meantime,
Left Reckoning
we had a long show. We went long in the first half with Cale Brooks talking about kind of similar topic actually to this, is the left losing sort of the working class and different sort of conversations around, for instance, the German example. We also talked about Sinema and how Crowder and Rubin both came to her defense, which is interesting. Crowder came to her defense with racism. Rubin came to her defense. This is just another case of the lefties just going crazy. I think taking a break from
they're crazy, man.
Trying to make Ashley Babbitt a martyr. But yeah, we talked about that. We also talked about Dave Rubin again in the post game about where we sort of align and disalign, unalign with Dave and the right on this whole regulating the tech companies thing. It's interesting. But anyway, I don't want to get too deep into that. Patreon.com/leftreckoning to get the post game, but go subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Emma. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Is I can't even see from here without my glasses. That Dragon Ball Z shirt?
Wow. Okay, well, I'm going to ignore that. How are you doing, Emma? But despite disrespecting my people, and by that I mean anime fans.
I'm sorry. I only know of Attack on Titan because my boyfriend likes it, but it seemed a little too scary for me, so I didn't watch it.
Hold on. It's actually Kimetsu no Yaiba Demon Slayer. It's a Demon Slayer shirt, and this is
okay. I'll just blame it on not wearing my glasses. What's happening over on the discourse?
Actually, the reason why I was a little bit tardy is because I was setting up, as I promised 2 months ago, my streaming capabilities, so I can display some high-level Slay Aspire play for all the fans. So be excited, be thrilled. I'm gonna get that camera and mic working, and we're gonna have a lot of fun.
Oh,
wow! Is this a Twitch thing?
I don't know. However, it streams out to people. I'm not really good with internet stuff, so it'll be Twitch or YouTube. Whatever one isn't gonna literally censor me for my ideas.
Right. Well, that's nobody. Rockfin.
Rumble. Do we have Matt?
Hello.
Whoa! Just like that. How you doing, Matt?
I'm all right. How are you guys doing?
We're doing well. What's happening over on Doomed?
There'll be a show. YouTube.com/Matt Binder. Tune in.
There will be a show.
There will be a show.
Oh, well, that's a
Daniel Day-Lewis of you.
Yeah, right.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, what I should probably do is I should probably get on Twitch after seeing how much money all those Twitch streamers are making. I gotta get in on that. If you've seen those Twitch hack details.
You're already on Twitch, aren't you?
Yeah, but I'm not a partner because I do the dual stream thing with YouTube and Twitch, and YouTube
They don't actually care. Left Reckoning.
They don't actually care, really?
We avoided that. Maybe I'm gonna get everyone in trouble, but Left Reckoning, we avoided doing that until we decided just to do it, and nobody's cared. But I only needed Twitch because we have rated you a few times, but the only problem is our Twitch is we only get like 20 viewers at a time. We like you, we kind of give more love to YouTube, which may be a strategic error.
Watch Left Reckoning at the same time on Twitch and on YouTube.
I want to be clear that this is not a money-making scheme for me on going on Twitch. I personally just have to do it for the mea culpas, for the many broken promises to my fans. So, it's more about like my deficiencies than any of my aspirations.
Well, be sure to forward me any money you make from Twitch if you don't want it.
Same here. 646-257-3920. We're going to head into the fun half. Check out Just Coffee, free trade coffee, chocolate, and tea. I did that okay there. And we will be taking your IMs. We will be taking your calls. We will be laughing, hopefully not crying, though. See you in the fun half.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabs.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey! Shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We are back.
Brandon, you were saying about the United States of Al?
I was just saying I've watched it all since last week. I binged the entire first season because the premiere of season 2 is tonight. So I'm just, I'm ready. I'm ready for it.
You want to hit us with a quick overview?
Yeah, tell us.
I don't think it's any different than you would expect having seen the trailer. However, the wall to wall, just like early 2000s era, just like comedy of, miscultural communications or cultural miscommunications is just like, it's so much. It's so it's all the time. All the jokes are based on it. The first line of the show was like, "What does he speak again? Afghanistanish?" And I was like, "Okay." Like, and then he like, "Your god brother? You don't know what language he speaks?" It's a very confused show because like everyone's character is just as smart or just as like ignorant about culture as they need to be for whatever particular joke they need to make at that time. Right. So it'll just go back and forth between like making fun of the daughter for being like a screw up, but also she does all their taxes and reads all of their like lawyer related.
How old is she?
Well, there's the adult daughter of the guy, Dean Norris is his name. He played the.
I know who he is. What an embarrassing like fall from grace.
My man has looked the exact same for like 30 years. So you got to, at least admire that. And so like his adult kids live at home. One of them is a Marine who was in Afghanistan. The timeline of the show is actually quite confusing because they try to make it seem as though the Afghanistan war hasn't been like 20 years. It's only been like, I don't know, however long they were there. It's very like, it's a very weird show. I would highly suggest it. Very funny, not earnestly funny, but very like, wow, ironically funny. It can't give it enough thumbs up. Just if I had another hand, I would, do it. If I could put my foot up like that, I would do it too. But I think people would get a little bit weird about that. So,
you know how they say the thing about like comedy brings people together, but if you're constantly like fixating on difference and the impossibility of communication, like, are you really bringing people together with? That's
comedy? The entire premise of like fish out of water comedy. It's the lowest fucking form of comedy ever. Well, like the easiest sitcom that's like possibly ever created, and people just keep doing it.
Well, so like Al is kind of like a magical Negro archetype, not to be rude. Like he comes in and basically has to fix their like Midwestern lives because like the dad is sort of dealing with PTSD from like being in, Afghanistan, but only really manifests as him being a deadbeat dad, like not wanting to spend time with his like daughter and instead just preferring to like get drunk and like eat, big burgers at like the, at the VA with all of his like veteran friends. And it's just a very weird show to come out in 2021. Like it just feels like a time machine, like going back to like 2005. And I just forget that it's been made this year. It's wonderful in that sense.
That's probably, the key selling point is people like that.
Yeah, so
some people for some reason want to go back.
Why else do people watch sitcoms on networks like CBS or NBC or whatever, right? I mean, there's not really any good sitcoms coming out anymore.
I mean, except for United States of Al, obviously.
All right, let's read a few IMs. Cleveland's. I think this is a sexual thing, so I'm not going to say it. Rams or Seahawks? What? I was right? Okay. Rams. I don't think the Seahawks are very good this year. Their defense is like way worse than people realize.
I don't follow football, but aren't the Rams like the best team in the league?
Well, they just like lost kind of oddly to the Cardinals, but that's just because Kyler Murray is a freak, and Stafford didn't play that well. I think the Rams could win the Super Bowl. I'm a big believer.
I love it. I like Stafford. Stafford was always he was always my late round quarterback pick in fantasy.
He's I feel for him having to spend all those years in Detroit, but he's a really good guy. Demian, are we talking about Anna versus Shapiro? We will be talking about that, I think, in a little bit.
I didn't even know about that until I saw the sound sheet.
Yes.
I thought it was baseball season, so I'm even further behind.
Anna Kasparian, friend of the show, friend of me, friend of us all, she debated Ben Shapiro at the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce. I hope she got a nice chunk of change for that. And their whole debate's online if you guys want to check it out, but we'll probably play a clip or two from that. Vinny Holiday, what do you think of the Los Angeles requiring vax cards for all indoor business? Too far or no? No.
Not far enough.
I mean, we do it in New York City.
Yeah, I have no problem showing my Vax app when I go to restaurants. In fact, like that, I don't have to be exposed to some asshole that isn't vaxxed and is lying about it.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if that's authoritarian, but commerce, like, I think we set these things up. We can't make commerce a pathogen conduit.
Also, the people that work there need to be protected as
That
well.
is actually the even more important point. Thanks, Emma.
Yeah, no
I
problem.
really think that the only sort of like thing I'm against about it is that it kind of, again, puts like frontline workers, service workers in the position of like enforcing laws that necessarily should be, enforced through mandates and through like positive reinforcement from the government and all sorts of things that like necessarily are going to cause people to like engage in physical altercations or be terrible to their already terribly treated and paid service staff. But, in terms of the law itself, I can't see a problem with it demanding people behave as though public health is a real thing.
Right, because either you have that confrontation at the door or you have it when they give you the virus.
Yeah, right. I was getting my phone fixed yesterday, and I went to go grab a bite to eat and a glass of wine while I was waiting, in the mall complex area, and I needed my vaccine card to enter the area, and I'm like, my phone, I don't have it. So anyway, that was a little bit of an odd moment, and that's why I'm against vaccine mandates in general, because of that slight inconvenience to me yesterday. Shout out to Tucker Carlson for directly praising the ideas of the Unabomber, says Yami Yugi. Yeah, he did do that. He's a bad guy, but really smart, great ideas. By the way, it doesn't matter if you're smart if you're not a good person. So smartness is not actually a great quality. I don't care about your intelligence.
Smartness is often just an indication that you didn't have to spend a lot of time working.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's like when people list the colleges and institutions they go to as some sort of shorthand for credibility. Michael Tracy's delightful girlfriend. As insane as it is that we have to examine Cinema's psyche because $3.5 trillion depends on her weird hang-ups, I wonder if her driving motivation, at least with the whole ignoring constituents and reporters thing, is simply the sort of contempt for regular people that comes with being an overachiever. Why should Cinema care about the regular people when she's obviously better than them? I think maybe you're a little onto something there.
To me, though, I mean, the outcome is way more important than what's leading up to it, because it could be that she's literally being blackmailed with some sort of horrible secret that's being held over her head and she can't do anything. But whether the point is, does she operate like a member of the Democratic Party needs to at this point in history to accomplish the basic necessities of infrastructure, for instance, or can't she? Is she too corrupt to do that? And I gotta say, I don't think we'll get any super clarity on that.
Yeah. Well, now that Cinema is being discussed, we can bring up this clip. I haven't seen this yet, but apparently Cinema finally spoke when being confronted. This was the first time she actually acknowledged that a human being was speaking to her. Not her constituents, she doesn't acknowledge them. Certainly not reporters, even though she's at her place of work where part of her job is to be asked questions by reporters, except for this reporter. And what did she say? What got her to speak?
How do you provoke a reaction?
How are you able to get her to acknowledge another human being asking about this incredibly important piece of legislation? Well, here's a lesson.
And it went up
And they went
Rochester
up.
to bring them back. So we call that the Mayo Shuttle.
I love it. I love it.
Hi. Thank you.
Hi
there. Hi, Congresswoman. Who are you gonna leave out for the Build Back Better Biden agenda?
Sorry, I just thought that was a very fun little opening end of a joke. You know when you hear like the punchline to something,
Yeah.
and then your brain wants to try to figure out what led up to that.
Right.
Anyway, sorry, Brad.
Sorry, start over. Yeah.
And it went up
And they went up.
Rochester to bring them back. So we call that the Mayo Shuttle.
I love it. I love it.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hi there. Hi, Congresswoman. Who are you gonna leave out for the Build Back Better Biden agenda? Can you talk with us, please, today, Congresswoman? Senator Sinema, would you please tell the majority of Americans who support Build Back Better why you won't vote for it? Who are you going to leave behind? Seniors who need health care, folks who need housing, the climate crisis, who are you going to leave behind, Senator?
So the only thing she said there, and I'm sorry, that wasn't a reporter, that was someone from Code Pink, a great activist organization. The only reason, the only way that you're going to get her to respond to you is to correct. No, I am not a congressperson. I'm a senator.
See, that's when I would have just started listing like just different things, like older person, like a state senator, just like continue to like egg her on that way. But
So you get her to talk more.
They're a more mature, better person than I am. Because if you're gonna pull a power play like that, then no, we're gonna play games.
Comptroller.
Hello,
Comptroller.
Emperor.
Comptroller.
School board member Kristen Sinema.
But she will correct that, but she won't say who she'll leave out, and she will be leaving out many people.
Yeah. It's, again, she feels very little obligation to speak to anybody who's coming up to her in public. I think it's important that she constantly is made to feel uncomfortable as this negotiation process continues, because she's standing in the way of helping millions upon millions, and she should feel the consequences of that. But it speaks a little bit to her bizarre psychology that we've tried to unpack here on the show, that's the thing that gets her, right? She's okay with stomaching people pleading with her to pass legislation that would help their lives and help their families' lives. She's fine with that. That's all part of the game to her. But don't you dare downplay the achievement that I have of being a United States Senator. You get that right. And that's what will get my goat. That's a bad person.
I think a lot of people are avoiding the sort of conclusion that maybe the Arizona senator seat is haunted. And like, people were wrongly condemning John McCain for being a dick for years, when really he was like possessed by some sort of specter of dickishness. And at the moment he died, it just passed on to the next senator of Arizona. And, in many ways, this is the only sort of explanation that makes any kind of sense.
Mm-hmm. I think that actually, I put that ahead of this is just some personality quirk or a black man. I think that it's some sort of, maybe some sort of demonic spirit that's been in the Arizona deserts, and it was uncovered. Maybe I don't know how. Maybe we can theorize how it was uncovered.
Her office is over some sort of burial ground. Poltergeist 4.
I will say that I did see something about how I saw people comparing McCain and Sinema, and not the same way, obviously, with the specter, but one big difference that I saw pointed out by a number of reporters that and this isn't to talk nicely about John McCain, obviously, but they said at least John McCain wouldn't shut up to explain his position. He'd go on all the shows and talk and talk and talk. Sinema apparently did not. The ghost of the specter that haunts Sinema is left that part of John McCain behind, apparently.
You want to take a quick call, Matt?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's go to 503. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
This is you. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
My name is Antoine. I'm calling from Los Angeles.
Hey, Antoine from Los Angeles. What would you like to talk about?
Can you take yourself off speaker?
Oh wow, this is my first time getting through. First time calling.
Are you on speaker? Are you on speaker or listening to the show somewhere?
I'm not. I just have a bad phone.
All right,
Can
so
you not hear me?
we could hear some feedback. So why don't you quickly just get out what you want to say, and we'll let you go and address it.
Okay. as a black man who's married to a Cambodian woman, I was having a conversation with my father-in-law about communism. Obviously, he went through the Khmer Rouge, and his perspective on communism is very different from mine. And I don't know how to engage that conversation given my perspective on capitalism and just being black in America and the effect that capitalism had basically with slavery. So just trying to get some perspective in terms of how you all would discuss that.
All right, thanks for the call. We'll address that right now.
Yeah, I mean that. I don't know if you guys have anything. That's
Please hang up. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's going. It's going. Yeah.
That's a very difficult thing to crack because that is like we talk about like their personal experience with history.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like communism maybe is probably not the word to go with there, even though in other contexts I think it's perfectly defensible, but that association, I think that when he hears the word communism, he thinks the Khmer Rouge exclusively. That's a very difficult thing to, I think, deprogram.
Yeah.
Right.
I think you should probably just be more conscious of, not saying that you should have to do this, but in terms of your framing, make sure you're using words that you know may not be triggers, for example.
And I think the only possible way is to have a more longitudinal, like long-term historical conversation about these things. And you're like, if I was in your situation, I'd probably be like boning up on the history of it myself. But I don't think there's any quick fixes for that sort of thing. That's going to be difficult, I think.
Right. In a broader context, I mean, I don't know, probably not. This probably wouldn't work on someone like your father-in-law. I believe that's who you said it was. But like, just point out that under capitalism, all sorts of atrocities have happened too. I mean, there is no perfect, system.
Right.
In terms of how specific governments carried those systems out.
Right, these are like state powers acting with military force and other types of violence, not, reading from the Communist Manifesto saying, this is what we have to do. These are geopolitical struggles.
Right.
I would trend towards having a more like issue-oriented, nuanced conversations about the problems that we're facing like currently right now and like, the path towards a better future. Ultimately, you don't want to say the past is the past, but sort of to get bogged down in the eccentricities of a particular communist regime in a country that he lived through is not going to be the pathway to sort of like moving towards a more coalescing towards a position about that workable for the future in terms of like maybe just talk about racism in America, maybe talk about like the current like infrastructure problems we're facing in America and speak to it more on a sort of delabeled issue by issue basis. I think, starting a conversation with, have you heard about communism is, not going to be effective. And, ultimately there's not necessarily a need to do that with every person just by nature of how deeply indoctrinated Americans are generally against communism. Sometimes it really is just about like talking to them about what they specifically and what their family and what their friends and what their communities deserve and, leaving it at that.
Right. So, I mean, great question though. There's no way to actually easily transition into this Yang thing, but I want to do a deep dive on this because Andrew Yang has left the Democratic Party. And as Brandon Straka pleads guilty for his role in the January 6th insurrection, there's clearly a vacuum in the walk away community. And Andrew Yang seems to want to take it because the People parties, they're a mess, right? They're not taking this. They're focused on screaming at images of AOC until they get hoarse and Yang he went on Tucker Carlson's program to step up in that area. He was on his Fox Nation show for an hour-long interview to promote this new third party venture. Okay. I'm sure it's a part of a money-making venture for him as well, because he just has no home in the Democratic Party anymore. And a gleeful Tucker Carlson was quite excited to have this former Democratic presidential candidate on, similarly to how he likes to have Tulsi Gabbard on, who is critical of the left but was a part of the left, as a part of, or the left, was a part of the Democratic Party, at least. He uses this as a way to promote his narrative that the Democratic Party has left a bunch of people. And seemingly, Andrew Yang was more than willing to at least go along with that narrative on his program. Here's how Tucker Carlson promoted it on his nightly show, and then we'll get into a clip of what actually happened on the program.
Democratic Party, of course, embraces that, is refusing to do anything about what's going on in our cities. And that's driving people out of the Democratic Party. Liberal people who look at that and they say, I'm sorry, I may be liberal, but that's just freaking nuts. I'm not for that. One of the people who's reached that conclusion is Andrew Yang, pretty liberal guy, but an interesting guy and a smart guy. We sat down with him for an hour recently, a brand new episode of Tucker Carlson Today. It comes out tomorrow. And we talked about his decision to leave the Democratic Party. Why? Here's part of it.
We're never going to make progress if we're not willing to talk to each other. And that's what the Forward Party is going to be about. I ran for president as a Democrat. I'm now an independent. I will talk to anyone who wants to actually make our lives better and solve the problems that are getting worse around us. We do not have unlimited time. This country is not doing well. You're a parent, I'm a parent. We have to try and make this country stronger and more whole for our next generation, or we will have failed them.
Stronger or more?
Yeah, it's really simple. I mean, it was Yang when he ran for mayor of New York, didn't win, but he got attacked for noting there were a lot of mentally ill homeless people attacking old ladies on the street. Not allowed to say that.
Maybe I'm being unfair, though. Maybe that was just a snippet of the interview that was helpful for Tucker Carlson's framing there. Maybe Yang, just like Jimmy Dore, just like Tracy and all of these types, maybe he went on to bring left ideas to the Tucker Carlson program. Maybe he went on there and he contradicted his white nationalist talking points instead of validating them, right? That's probably what happened. That's what Tucker producers do. They pick out people who are going to be adversarial to Tucker Carlson's project. That's exactly what happens. Just kidding.
So I have a question though too. Okay.
Yeah.
It's hard to address this because people inject race into it. It has nothing to do with race. It has to do with labor. So, like, what's the answer?
There's this whole rung of opportunities in the economy that Americans don't want to do. And those jobs right now are being filled by immigrants. And you can see that up and down the agricultural industry for sure. Where I live in New York City, there are a lot of delivery jobs and chef jobs and a bunch of other jobs that are being filled by immigrants right now.
For sure.
So there's this whole rung of opportunities. Now, what's the right number? What's the right balance? You know, I think that you'd have to do a lot more work to figure out whether, you know, we're getting it right.
I don't hear anybody even thinking about the calculation. I don't hear a single person. I mean, the objections that people have to immigration are mostly cultural. We could argue whether those are legitimate. I have those reservations, I'll be honest. But my main reservations are economic. So I don't hear many attacks on our immigration system from the right from an economic perspective. Like, what are these people going to do? Will this make us richer or poorer? And I don't even hear this conversation taking place at all on the pro-immigration side. So, like, why?
Well, I'm the son of immigrants myself, and my father got his PhD in physics from Berkeley and generated 69 U.S. patents for GE and IBM.
Yeah.
So there's a class of immigrants that I think are awesome for the country and hopefully will end up driving a ton of value. And I remember when I was talking about this on the Democratic debate stage, and I said something to that effect, and then someone said, hey, Andrew, FYI, like, you know, your parents aren't the typical immigrants we're talking about. So I think it is a question that we should, again, try and take ideology out of, is that a modern country should have policies on immigration that are trying to enhance our overall well-being. There's a human rights perspective that I certainly appreciate a great deal because, you know, people want better lives, and immigrants do end up adding economic value in most cases after a generation or two. But you have to have practical approaches that try and balance a number of concerns.
Yeah, economic value. That's the only reason for immigration is who can generate the most capitalist value. It's like a sociopathic way to, and then he fed into Tucker's framing that there are some immigrants that are helpful to American capitalism, but there are some that are,
Yang embodies what Tucker Carlson is supposedly really afraid of. He has exactly that mindset, I think, about, and I haven't seen Tucker Carlson talk about, for instance, this Verge story, revolt of the delivery workers, exploited by apps, attacked by thieves, and protected by police. The city's 65,000 bikers only have themselves to rely on. I haven't seen a lot of, let's unionize the gig workers that these people are. It's let's throw them out of the country. That's Tucker Carlson's solution. So, I mean, it's totally craven that Yang would go on the show, but I would rather him go on Tucker's show than be all over ostensibly left-wing media drawing that attention. I think if he wants to be a third-party guy and draw attention from the right, that's fine.
I love that line he said of the there's a certain class of immigrants that are awesome for the country. I think he said something like that. Obviously, when you say that, you're also saying that there is another class of immigrants that aren't. And for Andrew Yang, who is that great class of immigrants that we want to welcome? Oh, those people that provide value, such as patents, developing patents for IBM and these other big like technology companies. What value does that really give for? I mean, we know how patents are used, right? Like we know what patents are used for. Patents really don't add value for you or me. They add value to that company, so that company can make sure that if anyone even infringes on, if they seem to infringe on that patent, they stamp down on whatever technological advancement that Yang would be so positive for, right? I mean, that's the kind of wonderful value that that certain class of immigrants are giving to us, according to Yang. And well, I mean, his belief on that, by the way, is shared by a lot of tech CEOs. Whenever they make deals and get involved with the government in terms of immigration fights, they always make sure that whatever the final package is, they get a nice little carved out section for their tech immigrants, the technology, the developers, the engineers. They make sure they get right through so they can get some cheaper, I should say, because they're still getting paid a lot, cheaper labor.
No, absolutely. And I mean, it's all about the return on investment for immigrants in his mind. But I don't understand how the first part of his statement tracks to the second, because ultimately he said, the only immigrants he referenced there are ones who have jobs. Like he just said in the beginning that, immigrants coming up here, they're taking all our jobs in the gig economy away from like Americans who just don't want to do them. But like there was no immigrant in his example that didn't have like a job. We're not talking about like immigrants who are coming over to commit crimes, even in his own interpretation, just ones who are not like having a high class of tech labor job. And when we see, liberals usually go into the media talking about immigrants, they usually carve out that exclusion for people who are doing service-based jobs as well. But this seems to be about like drawing not only a divide between like the working class immigrant and the working class American, but also making the classist point that like Americans are just too lazy to work these jobs. And if you weren't filling them with, immigrant populations, then some of these Americans would just have to get up and, start delivering food, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, it's weird to me that he gets through all of these points without fully understanding that every immigrant he's talking about is contributing to the economy in a way, that is distinct from, even the Americans in his example. Like, I think that ultimately this is just at the end of the day, another vehicle to like launch a crypto. I'm surprised that he made it through the interview without dropping like Yang coin.
Yeah. And part of the like underlying assumption there though, is that both Tucker and him do want there to be a class of immigrants that do those jobs, that don't have protections, that are abused on a mass basis, including in that like great article. I interviewed them for the Peacock show. Now I'm blanking on the name of it, but on delivery workers here in New York. They want them to exist, but they want to still demonize them at the same time so that they are subservient and remain in like this marginalized group of lower class of people who we can pay wages who deserve it because they're dirty immigrants.
Let's be clear about the faux labor concerns. ICE and border enforcement at large is a state program that helps boss discipline their labor force by saying, hey, if you undocumented person, if you don't do exactly what I say and even more, I am going to call ICE and they are going to get you the hell out of there. ICE and these people serve the bosses. These organizations and this increased border enforcement fervor that Tucker's whipping up is not scaring any of the bosses that are exploiting these people at all.
It gives them another tool in their toolbox.
It gives a state
exploitation.
Tool.
Yeah,
a taxpayer-funded tool, goon squad that you can go send after your workers if, like I said, they aren't doing what you want.
Increase their insecurity and say we'll break up your family and send you back to a country that you fled, and if you don't submit to.
Absolutely. The easiest way to help workers in America, they say not native workers versus immigrant workers, would be to raise the labor standards for everybody, and so to allow immigrant workers to not have to operate within that realm of fear, which allows, bosses, capitalists to drive down wages. But that's just not an option for the right to argue for. So instead, it's just how do we divide the labor force, make one class of workers super precarious in order to drive a wedge between them and, another class of workers who are even, just slightly less precarious.
Did you see that tweet that Andrew Yang sent out this morning? He's apparently quoting what people have been saying to him about the Forward Party. And one of the quotes is, "You're giving radical centrists like me a home."
Radical centrist. Andrew Yang's a techno-libertarian. He doesn't even have real ideas. That's why I'm this is a party that's going to eventually become a vehicle for blockchain, crypto style, NFT style, scamming. And,
that's how you make donations to the candidates that won't exist in this political party. Forward coin. Oh man, wow.
You're giving radical centrists like me a home. Good. Of course, anti-democracy comes from the center.
Yeah, it's interesting too that I remember a lot of the Yang said he was more progressive than Bernie Sanders.
Those were the liars known as Bitcoin bros.
Yeah, right. Basically. That's the emerging faction. We got the toll cells and Bitcoin bros. Please, we don't want you poisoning the left anyway. Goodbye. All right. You want to take another call, Matt?
Sure, let's do it.
All right.
Let's go to let's see. 458, I should say. 458. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Oh yeah, this is Zach from Missouri.
Hey, Zach from Missouri. What would you like to talk about?
Well, I called a couple weeks ago talking to Sam and Emma, though Emma didn't get to chime in much, believe it or not, on the trying to get my mom to get vaccinated. She works for the federal government. She's been an anti-vaxxer my whole life. And I know she got the polio vaccine when she was a kid.
Well, she's an OG then. I got to give it up for her. I got a little bit of respect to all those anti-vaxxers who were around before COVID. Got to hand it to them.
Yeah, and I even try to.
When the main fight was basically homeschooling your kids and not listening to what the government's mandatory school lesson plan.
Oh, I was homeschooled.
Yeah. That's the old school anti-vaxxer fights. None of this running around taking horse paste and injecting yourself with iodine or whatever they're doing today.
Oh well, we had a scare at the little community we had when I was a kid of tuberculosis, and my mom was making iodine or I don't think it was iodine. It was something really gross with vodka and something else that I had to take in the morning every day before school.
Oh.
But
I guess
anyway,
those alternative medicines have
some
always been there.
old school remedies.
Yeah.
Those old school remedies there.
How was your mom? Was she forced
delicious.
To leave her job?
She hasn't been. Actually, that's what I'm about to get to. Is that I had to actually go in there for a court case for her. I had to testify. It was just a minor claims court thing, but afterward, I was, trying to psych myself up, and we went and sat down at this Vietnamese place in Fort Smith, Arkansas. And I said, Mom, I was wondering if you'd do me a favor. I was like, I came all the way down here to go to court with you, and I was wondering if you would do me a favor. And I tried to approach it in a way that was, would you do it for me? Because, which I had already gotten vaccinated, but I was going to get the booster while I was down there. And she, anyways, I said, will you go in with me? And I was going to pretend like it was my first shot. But anyways, she flipped out and walked out of the restaurant. And I did it. It was very poor timing, because then we had a 45-minute car ride home together back to her house. And so I had to sit in the car with her while she told me I was uninformed and I needed to do my research. And
what does her research consist of? She's got a lab in your basement, and she's got some microscopes, and she just does tests of her own, and
all of that. Yes.
I'm so sorry.
So
though.
she's got her scientist that she listens to. She claims that there's one from Pfizer that said that he quit in protest because of the side effects people were having, and that mRNA, which I actually had just argued with a nurse practitioner friend of mine who quit and went to a smaller clinic outside of Springfield, Missouri, because she isn't going to get the vaccine. She was saying that mRNA is a new technology that this is essentially like a mass test or a study. Like they're just doing it on the public. There were no clinical. So I actually didn't have any information on that to combat that. So when my mom brought that up, I was actually taken back again, because I was like, no, mRNA technology has been around for a while. But anyways, all that to say,
I forget if I asked you.
Oh, go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, no, I'm so sorry. This sounds so painful and frustrating. And I forget if you were we've had a couple of people call in to talk about anti-vax relatives. Did we suggest that you talk to her about Johnson & Johnson, which isn't mRNA technology?
Yeah, I brought that up, and the thing about it is there's so many people that their full-time job is just to get, it's funny that we're talking about Facebook and we're talking about anti-vax and how intermingled those two things are, because there's people that get paid by putting ads out there that are just to get clicks. So what they'll do is they'll just put as much misinformation and clickbait shit as they can in each video. So it'll go from talking about mRNA to talking about how the Johnson & Johnson really isn't traditional vax. It's not now, because now they're requiring 2 shots with the Johnson. And so she'll just go right into another video that she had watched, and she's like, well, who are your sources? And I say, well, I try to do my best to keep up with, and so in the end, it really did not go well. I haven't talked to her since. I talked to her once about a completely unrelated subject, but all that, and I was just going to say that I find it interesting that we're talking about the misinformation machine that is Facebook now at around the same time. Like they're being brought to the front of it because of all the almost everything my mom sends me is someone off of Facebook.
Yeah.
So
I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. Like I wish our tips panned out a little bit better.
Do you know the name of that scientist that she follows?
She emailed it to me, and I'll email it to the Majority Report.
Okay, I think I know who it is. Does Michael Yeadon ring a bell?
Yes. Yeah.
This guy left Pfizer like over 10 years ago. Like this guy seems to have been someone who was at one point, according to, I've heard of him before. This isn't someone who like left. People say, "Oh, a former Pfizer."
That's just how prophetic he was, Matt. He's a prophet.
Like,
he
this
knew
isn't
it
a
was
guy
coming.
who like left over COVID or something. This is a guy who.
No, but that's the thing is they'll say that he foresees things.
Right.
Like they always have a video to point to that he's a seer or something, and that it's just I want the best hope I have for people. My mom's pretty well off, but people that are just so desperate for, I think our culture is just completely forsaken. It's just we have no meaning in our society. They've undermined everything. They've undermined public education. They've undermined the institution of church. They've let capitalism take over church, and not that church is
no, we know what you mean.
It's not free of its
So what
community, I should say.
Right. What is your mom planning to do?
So I think the only.
I'm sorry.
Oh, she's gonna.
What's she planning
she's
to
gonna do a
job?
class action lawsuit or something.
Yeah, but aren't they gonna fire her first?
Yeah, she's pretty well off. She'll be okay, but she's probably gonna get teamed up with some of her coworkers and file, which I think a lot of people will win in the end.
Because let me tell you, I have developed a new COVID-19 drug that you don't have to take the vaccine. It'll solve all your problems. Just let her know.
Yeah, well, this is sad on so many levels. I'm just thankful that I can be in her life, but she's almost gone full prepper. So she's buying silver and yeah. Luckily, she'll never ever listen to this show or anything, so I can talk freely about it. No one that she knows will ever listen to this show either. So
maybe she should, and maybe we could.
You bunch of communists.
Maybe we could change her mind. No, but I'm sorry that you have to go through that. It doesn't seem like anything will get through to your mom in this specific instance, because this isn't something that was even newly developed over the past year or two. Clearly, this is who she is, and she's a true believer in this stuff.
It's really useful to hear, though, that your the media diet, like, because it's always it's a subset of people. There's a lot of them out there now, but you can pretty much trace this stuff to sources. And like you said, like your mom's a different case where she wasn't just swept up into this. There's some pre-existing anti-vax stuff, but it's interesting to know that even like everybody pretty much coheres around these certain media figures. I don't know.
Yeah.
Who does she go to, like, other than like specific like fringe personalities? Like what does she, when she goes online, where does she go? What does she visit?
Oh, she's a Fox News consumer.
Oh, okay. What does she feel about all those people being nicely vaccinated and everything?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's fake news. But the thing is they always leave a window open to the conspiracy. Like Tucker he'll never condemn the conspiracy theory. So as soon as I'm like, well, they're vaccinated, he's like, well, how come he's so anti-vax, or lets anti-vax people on? And I'm like, that's just because he doesn't want to lose his anti-vax audience. But that's a whole nother project. But I think ultimately what we have to do is not through authoritarianism, but we have to just initiate some of these policies that are just going to benefit society at whole, and hopefully bring us out of this bog of ignorant stench that we are just, it's so deep. All my friends out here are just,
One last question, actually. What did you have to do when you were growing up? Like, did you when you hit 18, did you just go out and get all the vaccines that you decided you wanted to get, that were still relevant to your age and everything?
Well, that would have been pretty, that's assuming that I wasn't, I didn't have to slowly unbrainwash myself. Right. That's kind of, so what was I was an anti-vaxxer. I'm happy I asked
that. Okay. So what changed you?
Well, ultimately, I'm not going to lie. I've only gotten the COVID vaccine ever.
Okay.
But I also live a pretty isolated life. I'm part of a small community where my daughter goes to public school, and I've claimed a religious exemption on that, and I'm starting to question all that. But this is the last piece of a puzzle of unbrainwashing. I mean, that was just a small aspect of the life I was brought up, and there were all kinds of things that are much more pernicious than don't get vaccinated, like very dark stuff that I've been bringing myself out of. And I'm thankful for the majority report in this sense, because they're the people you bring on as far as the COVID vaccine and vaccines in general. It's just something I didn't pay that much attention to. And I do believe also that there are poorly produced pharmaceuticals. One of them, and part of that is poorly produced vaccines that do have high levels of mercury in them and stuff. So I'm not anti-vax, but I'm saying you do have to, if you're going to inject something into somebody's body, you do need to make sure it's safe. And they failed in some senses in that, but that's beside the point with the COVID vaccine and other very safe vaccines that I know that everyone should get. But I also want to, if I put something in my body, I want to make sure it has a very high standard of, it was produced properly. So, but and you can tell I've got some of the anti-vax language coming up, but I'm just saying, I'm coming out of it slowly. I still am going to make sure it's produced safely, but I'm going to go get vaccinated now, because you have to do things for the benefit of your society, even if there are negative side effects. We do it all the time. And the biggest thing that I get into is my conservative friends out here. My sister says it all the time. You can't regulate morality. And I'm like, that's literally all the government does ever.
Yeah.
Well, just regulates morality. Don't drive too fast. Don't shoot somebody.
I just think one thing is it's interesting because you say you're in more of a remote area. I think it's way easier in New York to get over anxiety about this stuff because you're surrounded by everybody who's just getting it. There's lines for it. You just get the thing in your arm and move on, and and it's not a big deal. And you see actually people. You'll hear people say oh yeah, I had a fever and some chills, and then I'm fine the next day, and then you see that it's fine and copacetic and can move on with it and instead of this, you have people being bombarded with media messages that are just aggravating all of these anxieties way worse, and so you feel the need to do more and more research to try to address anxiety that really can never be addressed 100% because of a lot of just the nature of medicine in general, but also our particular kind of medicine under capitalism.
Appreciate the call, man. We gotta we gotta move on.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, but great.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, it was an interesting call.
Bye.
All right. To a clip you have in mind?
Poof. I want to cover this because I think it's I don't know. It's fascinating. I was trying to find specific clips of this debate between Anna Kasparian and Ben Shapiro online, and I found on Twitter that there was a right-winger who was clipping this for Ben, and I was like, oh wow, this might be deceptively edited, or maybe these are clips that make Ben look good, and no, this is one of the ones that they clip, and it doesn't make Ben look good.
I think that's an issue in this country that gets ignored or completely denied, and I think that's wrong. I think that's what also leads to the division that we're experiencing.
Well, that's going to be the major cultural war issue, right? Because the fact is that I, as a parent, believe that if you're going to teach...
You think there's no systemic racism?
I believe that it depends on how you define systemic racism. So if you're talking about legal regimens of racism, no. If you're talking about history has after effects, of course. So I think there's a real problem with semantic overload in a lot of our political conversations. And when people say systemic racism, sometimes what they mean by systemic racism is history has consequences. You can't have 150 years of, 300 years of slavery followed by Jim Crow and that not have after effects, which of course is true. And sometimes what they mean is that every inequality in American public life is due to some systemic inequity that is currently taking place in the United States, which I think is absolutely 100% false.
I mean, we certainly see that playing out in our criminal justice system. Are you going to deny that, or are you going to say that, let's say, African Americans or Latinos are just inherently more criminal or
I'm not going to say either of those things. I'm going to say that
so why are they overrepresented in our prisons?
I mean,
especially when you consider...
This may be beyond the scope of our conversation, but the answer is because not all groups commit crimes at the same level. That has nothing to do with genetics. That has everything to do with circumstances.
Can you guys hold those thoughts on education? Because I do want to get back to some of that too.
I know. How lame. He said enough.
He just said the thing that he told Anna he wasn't going to say. Like he literally just said it.
Gonna say it's cultural. It's cultural, right? It's
Charles
not,
Murray, baby.
It has nothing to do with the DNA.
Charles Murray was both cultural and the genetic.
Yes, yeah. I mean they honestly, if you got them a little drunk, and I'm not sure what Ben Shapiro drinks is probably it sounds like a nightmare. I'm sure he would say it's genetic, but they feel that saying that it's just cultural is a little bit more palatable, and it's also a way to not look at any of the systemic factors that Anna mentioned there.
Well, I mean, it's also a coded term. Eventually, some people, who wanted to be people who presumed themselves to be smarter than the sort of rabid neo-Nazis or, white supremacists out there started, coding genetic predisposition towards crime as a cultural predisposition towards crime. But most people can't even describe Black culture or like a Latino culture, any of these sort of like inherently criminal cultures in a way that's distinct from larger American culture itself, because that's just what culture is. It's just another sort of like loaded term that never gets unpacked. Like, what do you mean by Black culture? In the context of like America, Black culture is a very specific thing in relation to those exact historical facts that you just said are people, that you are willing to accept are actually causing these sort of inequalities. So, you're having it kind of both ways where it's just like, oh, we're saying it's cultural, but culture exists in this kind of vacuum that people are allowed to acontextually draw from and choose and make these choices to do, the right or wrong thing, even though we know that the laws are also like still just literally racist.
Right, exactly. It exists entirely to naturalize the real history, which is that these discrepancies are because peoples have been coerced and oppressed in this country, and not because they have been articulating the wrong sides of culture.
Right.
I gotta watch that debate.
And also, I mean, like the history, that redlining just ended like 20, 40 years ago, right? Like this is not like a history as in like 400, 500 years. They mean like history like 50 years ago. People are alive who are still affected by things that people, well, I would say learn in history books, but Americans don't learn a lot about their history. So, that they theoretically would be learning in like a modern history, modern social studies class, like stuff like the Tuskegee experiments, redlining, Jim Crow, lead in water, and then like underprivileged schools, like things like that are still all happening. And, it's just a very easy thing to say, like, okay, well, there was a past racism, and then now we're in a present, and there's like a divide there that is unable to be sort of like bridged by any real, timeline of events that is contiguous.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, culture, like you look at something like the structure, like the Homestead Act, and how that basically prioritized European immigrants. Like they explicitly banned Native Americans living as Native Americans, but if you convert like Christianity for something, you can be involved. But culturally, it was very difficult unless you were in a sort of cloister of immigrants, European immigrants. Like you couldn't just be like a Black person from the South to move up to North Dakota. Of course, some did, but culturally it was hostile, right? To take advantage of that giant gift that this country gave, for instance, my ancestors.
Yeah.
And also, just to point out, like at the end of the day, like the law as it's written is not a really good judge of anything, because like that's just not how law is practiced. We go based on law use. If we are over policing Black communities, even if the law says that like you can apply this law, stop and frisk evenly, or doesn't make a mention of race, if it's being used that way, then that's just the way it is.
Right.
Like the sort of appealing to like a sort of abstract law as written on paper that no one follows or goes by is just like the Constitution thing. Like, oh, well, the Constitution says free speech, so I interpret it to be this way. So you can't present any sort of factual statement about how it's actually interpreted to sort of contradict that, because I'm speaking to a more like philosophical sense of like, well, this is an ideal we should all be striving to. So it's somehow incumbent upon the people who are fighting against equality to pretend as though like the law is being exercised evenly, because we should be working towards that, even though as a fact it just isn't. You know, we can talk about how a lot of Jim Crow laws became just generally speaking like vagrancy laws, like loitering, that just give police carte blanche to harass anybody who they think looks suspicious.
Marijuana laws and just what's the name of the smell test where you're like able to basically search someone's car if they smell
probable cause or whatever. But I mean,
the broken windows policing, you know, things like this, they're just like, they're modern remnants or modern incarnations of the racist systems that, you know, people it's like to identify as the real racism, in the same way that people identify like putting the swastika tattoo on their forehead as the real racist. So you don't got to worry about like the people who are just saying that we shouldn't let any immigrants into the country because they might spread disease, because they didn't use like a bad word, or they didn't they were able to clear the lowest bar possible.
Yeah, and for a facts don't care about your feelings guy, the implication that there's a one-to-one relationship between crimes committed and people being arrested for those crimes, like we've kind of hinted at with the discrepancy in, say, pot enforcement, is just absurd. And anybody that would argue based on that, like Ben Shapiro has hinged his on, is ludicrous.
Well, I mean, he'll go off of like selective but based figures, facts and figures that I'm able to quantify or whatever, right? Because he uses that as a tool to obscure those larger dynamics. When you're presenting yourself as rationalist and only looking at the figures in front of you, you're able to hide a lot of real truths, because it creates a cherry picking situation where you're picking those pieces of data to uphold your narrative, and two, the artificial appearance of rationality, which inherently chills all kinds of like leftist critique of that as hysterical and emotional.
Well, that's the funny thing about the far right too, because I remember like the big thing they were against, when I first joined Twitter, was like postmodernism, the idea of postmodernism and like extreme cultural relativism and all this other bullshit that they didn't really understand. And now that like vaccine denialism has become like the hot topic amongst them, they're all interested in like how facts are made and how like, all of these like scientific discoveries and all these scientific sort of mandates come to be, manipulated by politics. But if you sort of like talk to, Ben Shapiro or that type of person about like the, black on black crime rate is not indication of some sort of inherent criminality, just how segregated our society is. Like the investigation into how these like statistics and facts actually come about, they're not really interested in that either. We for a fact just don't know how much crime actually occurs in white communities or in non-black or people of color dominant or non-poor communities, because policing in America is very kinetic. Police in America like go about like wandering communities looking for people to prey on, and we know that because we know based on like civil asset forfeiture and the over ticketing of various communities that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and not only do we not know the crime in those communities, we also don't know it among cops. Alec Karakatsanis has a great tweet here on this story from Houston Chronicle. The cop committed federal crimes, but so basically the headline: virtually everyone a Fort Bend police officer. Fort Bend. Fort Bend. Is that no? South Bend is the people who get. Sorry, I got confused a little bit. The police officer stopped was Hispanic. His boss shrugged. The cop committed federal crimes, but federal prosecutors almost never investigate police for several million physical and sexual assaults they commit each year. It's not a priority. Instead, the cop was enthusiastic, hired by neighborhood sheriff. Let's be clear: none of this police officer's hundreds of crimes were counted by the police in the crime data they published. Journalists must understand this and explain to readers that the U.S. quote crime data does not include almost any of the crimes committed by cops.
I think just either this year or last year, the amount stolen by cops via civil asset forfeiture finally, outpaced the amount of stuff that they've recorded stolen by like just basically citizens. Like they've or matched it or something like that. Like it's an insane amount of crime that cops are committing, and that kind of goes to like the untold portion of this kind of narrative about policing and like, what it takes to keep America safe, is that society at large has accepted a very, very scary prospect that we just have roving bands of people with guns that are, constantly beating up old people, constantly shooting unarmed civilians, constantly committing sexual assaults, domestic violence against their own partners and also just like citizens. But that's all necessary because we have an inborn population of inherently criminal brown people who like need this kind of justice lobbed against them. Otherwise, the society itself would just descend into madness. So, you got to send monsters to fight monsters, even if they're willing to engage with the existence of all crime amongst cops. And, that's been expanding, obviously, with the, ICE and needing to take care of this now, sort of both out and inside threat of terrorists and immigrants who are crossing illegally. But ultimately, the number of people who think it's like a good argument to say like, well, cops shoot a lot of white people too, is hilarious, because it's just like, yeah, but they shoot more white people in this country than like cops in other countries shoot white people. And the only reason they're allowed to do that is because you've been told a very, very vague story about why it's necessary to have them, because otherwise black people might, be preying on you. And that's just very like, propaganda. It's sad, but like people in America are very used to, I think, giving up these sorts of rights, these sorts of safeties, making these sorts of like very, very scary, sacrifices in terms of like what it means to be an American, in fear of a very, very, heavily criminalized population that they've never really had to come in contact with.
Speaking of Ben Shapiro, though, I want to move on to maybe a lighter topic in terms of Ben's commentary. Ben Shapiro has chosen to weigh in on the cinema situation when activists asked her questions, her constituents, in a bathroom. Now, notice how the right wing is primarily leading the charge in defense of Kyrsten Sinema, and goes to show the kinds of friends that she's making with this act of defiance on the Build Back Better plan. Ben Shapiro had thoughts about it, and trigger warning, he's about to talk about bathroom activities. So if you thought that the lack of a Hello Tushy ad today was meant we weren't going to be talking about going to the bathroom, Ben Shapiro has taken up that mantle for you. Yikes.
Hey, this reared its ugliest head yesterday when protesters followed Kyrsten Sinema, who's the senator from Arizona, who, again, is sort of the Democratic John McCain in all of this. Protesters followed Kyrsten Sinema into the bathroom. Here's a little bit of video of what that looked like.
We need a Build Back Better plan right now.
We knocked on doors. We need solutions to the Build Back Better plan. Need has the solutions that we need. We knocked on doors for you to get you elected, and just how we got you elected, we can get you out of office if you don't support what you promised us.
We need 7 million citizenship for 7 million. We need the Build Back Better plan right now.
I'm just going to point out here that it is my personal belief that everyone ought to be able to poop in peace. This is my personal belief. I want to live in America where we can all take a dump in privacy and peace. If that's too much for you, well, you can find plenty of left-wing programs that will tell you differently. I was told that women's spaces were sacred spaces. Apparently not, if you're going to vote in favor of a bipartisan infrastructure act, but not in favor of a $3.5 trillion spending act. Now, the part of this that's amazing is how much kind of soft support the protesters receive for following Kyrsten Sinema into a bathroom.
Who says women's spaces are sacred spaces? Like,
certainly not the far right.
Yeah, and certainly not the left, because I've never heard that in my life. But that's sounds like some weird like religious stuff there. I'm sorry to have to share that with the audience. Him talking about human excrement and who gets to poop in peace. I don't really think that there's a good portion of people who should not be able to
Should Hitler
poop
have been
in
able
peace.
to poop in peace? I mean, I'm not making a direct, let's just go there just to draw the point out. Like, no, I think most people say like, actually there's a line to be drawn. So it's just where you draw that line.
And she has the ability to poop in peace if she supports the Build Back Better plan. This is how progress gets done.
I don't even think
sausage gets made.
I don't even think that's what they believe, but obviously the far right, content makers spent so many years complaining about trans people being allowed to go to the bathroom, because it might lead to the false society. This to me speaks to, I think, an underlying issue that, kind of leads the left and the right to, at least in the media space, to like coalesce around each other, which is that like as a public figure, as somebody who makes their, living from being a public figure in a way that's distinct from like being a celebrity, that there needs to be some kind of like strict public-private divide between people who like essentially make a living making society worse or by being obstinate. And this kind of defense of cinema is a defense of the idea that like, people should be allowed to be, socially deleterious member of society, but also just go home at night to like their family and like pretend as though like they're just, a normal Joe Schmo going to like, work in the coal mines or whatever people pretend like Americans do. When in reality, it's just like, our politicians are not celebrities, and the transition from like voter into like fan of a celebrity who you're not allowed to make real demands of unless you do it in their preferred way is just not it's not real. It's just like it is a shift and pivot in responsibility from, again, the politicians who were hired, who were elected to fulfill a very specific role, onto the voters who have been transformed into people who are, should just expect them to be able to act like capricious gods, or like Brad Pitt, doesn't owe you anything. It's just like, no, our relationships with our like politicians and with a lot of our, pundits and a lot of our journalists is a transactional one. And to treat it as though it's not transactional is not to be like, reactionary, but to be aware of the boundaries and the expectations that are put upon them and that they have to follow through with. At the end of the day, like we're not fans of Kristen Sinema in even the most like broad sense of the word. And we shouldn't be expected to comport ourselves like fans of her, even if, that means that like we're also not anti-fans of her, who should be required to pretend as though the actions she makes are just her own and have no real impact on anybody else.
Yeah.
It is amazing to hear the guy who hops on every trans bathroom outrage talk about going to the bathroom in peace. I mean, this is a guy who certainly loves making sure that transgender people don't get to, what did he say? Poop in peace in the bathroom that matches their gender identity. I mean, come on.
Yeah, pretty sure also just by definition, being in a public restroom is not a peaceful poop.
Right.
I would say, like, Ben Shapiro does have some consistency on this. Like, the sort of... there's a line between authoritarianism versus fascism. Say fascism more interested in popular mobilization. And I'd say Shapiro's strictly on the authoritarian side because he was one of the only right-wing pundits who denounced Jan 6 and said it was silly, and it said it was, more importantly, motivated by a lie about the election. So he's, I think, more or less discomfortable with sort of popular expressions or demands, and so there's actually some consistency, unlike the other people trying to make Ashley Babbitt a martyr at the same time as saying, "Oh, look at poor Sinema."
Also, I'm laughing at the Democratic John McCain that he's like, we were joking about it before, but he said it in a very serious like very seriously.
A little tear rolled on his cheek, and he, got a little, his heart grew two sizes when he thought about John McCain.
Ryan Cole says Sinema. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. It's fine.
Ryan Cole says Sinema can move in peace if she supports the infrastructure bill, or if she would give her reasons for not supporting it. As she acts all sassy and thumbs down for a living minimum wage, but won't say to anyone her reasoning for her obstructionism. It really is incredible how she's just like not speaking publicly. She feels no tether to the people who have elected her.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I get from her, that she thinks that she's allowed to act like a celebrity. We've entered the age of politics where it's become very heavily, influenced by social media, very heavily influenced by just our our lack of real oversight and accountability from the media for people who are put in these jobs for things. And now people, now we have this new wave of politicians who just are very, very like, this is just a way to be famous, I think. And that's what it seems like. And the kind of responsibilities that come from being a public servant and not just like any other type of, public official are just different. And, I know people have been trying to transition us into thinking about Hillary Clinton as like, she's a service provider of content and, you're just a fan. So, you can't be mad when she doesn't provide what you want. It's like, that's just not, no. It's like they're, I hate to be that person, but, politicians work for you. They're supposed to work for you.
Yeah. A kid tested Politburo approved. I really don't get the outrage over the protesters following Sinema into the bathroom. They were calm, didn't approach her in a threatening manner, and didn't raise their voices. It is because the people who are pushing the outrage are worried that it's going to happen to them.
Well, and it's also everyone defending cinema is basically pro-austerity, but doesn't want to just say that. I mean, Ben Shapiro did. He said, we don't need to do the 3.5 trillion, but most people don't want to elaborate that because it's distasteful to a wide audience.
Right. So they make it about decorum,
Yeah,
right? And civility.
It's about decorum, or like that, like Crowder focused on, like, was an illegal immigrant that was asking her.
Yeah.
Like, it's that stuff, because you can't focus that you're just supporting the boss. That's why Tucker makes his immigration stuff about, I actually just care about laborers. That's why I support this massive sort of apparatus to discipline immigrant workforce.
Your left testicle. Yang's comments highlight a significant cultural division in the Asian community and how lighter-skinned Asians are both more advantaged than and looked down on brown Asian immigrants. America's racist dynamic extends to very unusual places in our society, and his attitude highlights part of the lesser-known instances. I appreciate that.
Go ahead. No, I think that's very insightful, because I think, you're right. And that we're told that there is just like a block of Americans who don't like immigrants because they're like, rabid Southerners, Republicans, and that if you belong to a minority group, you must inherently be pro, like, just a broad sort of progressivism based on, like, just, again, vague race. But there's a lot of division within the Black community as well about the, should we have immigrants, from not only Africa, but just like, Latin America. There is just, a hegemonic neoconservatism in our society that we fail to interact with, because we've been told that there are just so many groups who are, by necessity of their own identity, inherently immune to, like, feeling these kinds of ways.
Yeah. The Chris Lapako, Cambodia suffered major bombing campaigns because of our capitalist phobia of communism. Yes. Also, Pol Pot used xenophobia to scare rural Cambodians about the Chinese and Vietnamese immigrants in the capital. Kind of like Trump stealing a lot of Bernie's talking points and scapegoating immigrants and coastal elites to explain why they don't have nice things. All good points. Evelinio Gracias. Yang is a dork with a superiority complex. Reminds me of fellow Mexicans who throw quinceañeras at ballrooms, not backyards. It's always snowy in Ottawa. Just start the fun half each Thursday. Should start with a 5-minute anime web report by Brandon. You for that?
I think that that's, always appropriate.
Fierce Deity. I think there's been a failure of messaging on mRNA because the technology being new is a really frequent complaint of anti-vaxxers. And I feel like if you ask the average anti-vaxxer whether mRNA itself is natural, they'd be confidently incorrect. Obviously, the vaccine uses synthetic mRNA, and that would probably just be their new talking point. But I feel like most of them are convinced mRNA is an invented thing and that their body isn't currently chock full of it. And
I don't think, I just want to say quickly, I don't think that kind of gotcha is going to be constructive. But what I would say is the reason that we were so quick out of the gate with these sorts of things is because they were prepared for, I think it was bird flu, SARS. And then SARS went away and ultimately didn't have to deploy this. But that the work was already pre-done, right? It was sitting basically on the shelf. And that, historicizing it that way, I think will do more to assuage people's concerns than, a gotcha like that.
Yeah, and then sorry, just really quickly, the J&J suggestion is not a gotcha either, and I know that like the technology's closer than I'm making it seem. It's only just because like I know of somebody who was anti-vax, like had to get the vaccine, and they did it by they did the one shot. They were more comfortable with that. But continue, Brandon.
No, I would just say I think that science, arguing science is just one tool in the kit, and oftentimes you shouldn't be confused by the seeming mastery of people in conspiracy circles of like science language, because ultimately it's a failure of critical thinking that is leading them to this position, not a failure of like science in the broadest, like the belief of science in sort of the broadest term. And so like getting bogged down in like the origins of mRNA, DNA is only going to get you so far, because like you said, there are 1,000 YouTube videos out there talking about like science with like people with very, very sketchy credentials. And sometimes you just have to take different tactics. Like, try fear. try try fear, try emotional manipulation, try like other types of propaganda, because trying to, sometimes, I think people get bogged down in trying to like meet people where they believe they are, as in like a rational science believing adult, when at a certain point you might not have the time to try to like have many debates about, the biology of viruses with somebody who's clearly spending a lot more time learning about it, from bad sources than you are. Sometimes you got to just take a different tactic.
Yeah. You want to take another final call?
Yeah, let's take one more call here. Let's see. Let's go to the phones. 510. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
I gotta take this call. Sorry.
510. Hello?
Hey, y'all there?
Yes, we are
Hey,
here. What's your name?
can
Where you
you
calling
hear
from? We can hear you. What's your name? Where you calling from?
Hi, it's Hamish in Tahoe.
Hello.
Sorry, I was actually checking out at the store and had to run out, pull my mask off.
Good timing.
Hey, what can I say? I loved the Zyron interview, Emma. Tried to call you a couple of weeks ago on a Thursday.
Glad. Thank you.
Yeah, well, on that topic, I stopped watching football when the stuff came up about the brain damage that was happening, and the movie Concussion came out. I just wasn't that interested anymore in watching live action brain damage.
Yeah.
But then Kaepernick's protest actually made it interesting again, So I was ready to start watching, and then he got blackballed,
Right. Yeah.
So thanks for that topic.
Well, to me, I think that there's. Oh, did you want me to weigh in or?
Well, I actually just wanted to mention that and give you the kudos. What I really wanted to talk to you about, and I'm sorry that I have such bad timing for the conversation flow. Maybe I should just say this and let you all respond. What I really keep thinking about is this belief that keeps popping up that veganism is the best, most healthy, best for the planet diet out there. And that week that maybe it wasn't that week, but you, Emma, you said that none of us is a pure leftist unless you're a vegan. And I also wanted to just point out that's a bit of an overreach.
Did I really say that?
Definitely, you can have right-wing vegans.
I don't know why. I'm not a vegan.
Yeah,
I don't know why I would say that.
I also want to say that that's incorrect. Right. Not that Emma didn't say it, but I'm also not a vegan, and I don't think myself as perfect.
I'm not accusing any of y'all of being a vegan.
Thank you.
I actually, and I really don't want to get into a huge discussion of the whole topic, except to request that you are maybe a little more skeptical about the belief that veganism is the healthiest diet for a person and for the planet. And there are people that you could read or maybe even interview on the show that would be happy to present another side to incorporate, the benefits of incorporating animal products into your diet.
I know what you're talking about.
And I've already emailed you about that, but
sorry, I was just making a Jordan Peterson all beef diet joke, but you emailed us.
Yes.
All right.
I probably was kidding, or maybe critiquing the purity around veganism that sometimes I think is off-putting to some people.
We haven't had a good vegan fight online for years. I feel like that was a big, flare-up topic. Veganism and polyamory, 4 or 5 years ago. If you mentioned any of those things, people would just be out of the woodwork telling you that you weren't a good person if you weren't a vegan or polyamorous. And please do not at me to rehash this topic. I don't want to talk about it. I'm just saying that, for the most part, just in terms of veganism, the kind of global supply chain that we have and sort of really, really heavy extractive plantation farming and monocrop culture in places where we get our crops from is just inherently problematic to like the environment, but also like part of the same structure that is destroying the planet that the meat packing industry is as well. It's kind of hard to extricate, unless you're like getting your food locally, then eating a banana in winter in like Oklahoma probably isn't great for the environment.
I'm open to
100%. And definitely the last few years there have been bigger fish to fry, more pressing concerns. All I really actually wanted to ask is that you're more cautious about painting veganism as the be all end all of healthy diets and environmental sustainable diets.
Okay.
All right, thank you for the call. Appreciate
So
it.
can you please do that? Will you commit to that?
I reject the assertion that I said that veganism is the only healthy diet.
Go ahead, Matt.
Look at Emma running to the bathroom to hide, not directly addressing the situation.
I will commit to the caller's request
Emma.
and not. In fact, I will commit to the caller's request since one day a week I do a vegetarian diet. One day of the week I will demonize vegans and do an all meat diet just to keep things fresh. But no, I think
Fair
that
enough.
The caller.
Okay, thanks
caller
for entertaining my call.
Thank you for the call. Whew.
All right.
Appreciate all callers, but that topic sort of derailed us there.
Veganism still has that capability.
Yeah, well, it definitely, now we're gonna have some IMs about it, including Prairie Fryer Kowalski. Veganism is definitely the healthiest and most ethical diet. I'm not saying it, caller. And I say that as a meat-eating cattle rancher. There are labor arguments, but it is complicated. I might call about this sometime soon. Need greenhouses, left as poggers. Thank you, Kowalski. Heinlein knew what to do. I don't know what that is. In The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, the rebel had the sewage pumps reverse their flow towards the lunar governor's residence. Power to the poo. Sounds absolutely nasty, but I like the creativity. Eat the
Robert
Rich.
Heinlein, the guy who wrote The Puppet Masters, or is that a different person?
Yeah, I think so. Eat the Rich. I found out recently another friend of mine is anti-vax, and part of her defense came with a Forbes article detailing how pharmaceutical CEOs got hella rich off the pandemic. I know, yeah, Forbes will literally print anything these days, apparently, for clicks. She said, I just know they're not telling us everything. So I understand the distrust. It's just frustrating that the distrust that's been fomented has been weaponized. Instead of creating more demand for transparency and regulation, it's a forever cycle of lies, grifts, and radicalization. That's a theme in a lot of the conspiracy theories, where the skepticism that makes total sense is misdirected towards purposes and ways that don't necessarily challenge power. And this anti-vax conspiracy is like much more widespread, but this is a through line in a lot of things.
Just to jump in real quick, I think ultimately it's worth noting that since anti-vaxxerism has gotten like its foothold in like mainstream news sources, even if you want to, let's say, be skeptical about the efficacy and like the structures of the FDA and the the Food and Drug Administration, how they do things, the people like Tucker Carlson who are arguing in favor of like not getting vaccinated or whatever like sort of vague thing they are sort of arguing in favor of related to like vaccines being bad, their only goal is to make that system less trustworthy. Like, any sort of like solution they have in plan for like, vaccines aren't being tested properly is going to involve like defunding the FDA, defunding, any of the sort of like public sector positions at the CDC that are in charge of like researching these things, and giving that money to private companies who are going to do a worse job.
Stephen Powder, Tucker Carlson saying nobody wants to talk about the immigration calculation as if he doesn't love to listen to honestly talk. Admits his immigration fears are entirely cultural fear-mongering.
Well, he didn't quite admit that, but he alluded to that reality.
Also, people talk about the economics of it all the time. People talk about how, immigrants who work undocumented without any sort of paperwork are paying taxes that citizens, also pay, but are not able to draw on any sources. I mean, any of the resources that those taxes go towards.
It'd be interesting to Tucker do a segment on that. Look at that. These guys are actually paying taxes for benefits that they cannot claim.
If anything, they're better than Native Americans. I think I can say that with a lot of confidence.
Not as in like indigenous. You mean like just American?
Oh, well, yeah. No, if I meant indigenous, I would have said indigenous. When I say Native Americans, I mean like white people.
Five more. Nightmare blunt rotation. That's Matt's amazing joke from yesterday. Just popping in to say I don't get to listen every Thursday, but the M Majority Report is my jam. Thanks for the laughs and all the good work you do on the serious side of things. Lek is best, poggers. Thank you. Ray says, will be interesting to contrast the Yang appearance on Tucker Carlson versus his appearance on TYT tonight with Cenk Uygur and Michael Shore. I did not know that he was going to do that. Chris from Taiwan, I think smart is such an overused word. Different brains are good at different things, and pretty much everyone's brain is good at something. Smart, as it gets used colloquially, seems like a cultural signifier rather than a useful description of someone's intelligence. I could not agree
I'd add,
more.
like, most people, brains aren't good at something, but most things, and if they were given enough time to learn even specialized tasks, they'd be fine with it.
Yes. All right, two more. Rob from Dedham, Yang is such a grifter. A new political party, a book, and also doing a tour with stops at City Winery where tickets are $50 each. Next stop for this guy is Yang Coin and NFTs of him eating his favorite NY slice from Sbarro.
There is no way that this does not involve crypto at some point. I cannot. I wish I could put money on that, but I won't. But it has to. It has to be a crypto scheme.
Yes. Don't.
At the very least, at the very least, their website says they'll be accepting Bitcoin donations.
Like crypto is going to have to fund the UBI. That's just what it is going to have to be.
And the final I am of the day with a handle I will not read.
I like Bitcoin funding the UBI because maybe one month you'll get $100, $200, maybe 1,000, but maybe another month you'll have to give Andrew Yang $500.
It's the loot boxification of social services.
Right.
Pol Pot had alleged CIA connections and was also, this is about the caller whose in-law is Cambodian, and was also at war with Soviet allied communist countries in the Cambodian-Vietnam War. It was not a communist country, but used communist iconography to build a base of support. I would suggest looking at organizations like the American Party of Labor, who are an anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninist organization who look at communist countries, past and present, through a very critical lens for those kinds of analysis. Great point. All right, guys, thank you so much. We will see you I will see you on Monday, and Sam will be seeing you along with Matt and Bradley tomorrow.
What?
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and